a bit like an addiction. You've got to make something, you have to do something. It's borderline obsession. And every bike we build is my favourite bike at the time, and as soon as it's done, I want to build another one. Sven Cycles is something I've been thinking about ever since I started cycling in my late teens. We want bikes that ultimately you'll really enjoy riding. There's never a bike that's the same. There's always a slight change. And as we build them individually as well, they have the marks of a bike that's built by hand. Most people I know cycle have an idea of their dream bicycle. And it may be an evolving idea you've had in your head. And we've worked with a lot of people that have come to us with sketches and scrapbooks. It's really, really nice to build something that's just one-off and unique. I think a lot of people see a bicycle as two wheels and a frame in the middle. There are a lot of subtle changes and nuances in design which can change the riding characteristics quite dramatically. I'm a really big fan of modernist architecture, and the simplicity of a modernist building is really hard to achieve. And with some of our bikes, they may look very simple, but I think people should not underestimate the time and effort that goes into designing a product. Tubing is key to a bike's feel and ride. Reynolds tubing has been in my life ever since I can remember. Growing up, I could never afford a frame manufactured with their tubing. We can now put a badge on our bike saying manufactured at Reynolds, which is a sort of thing as a kid I just wouldn't have believed was going to happen. Every part of the bike has a specific tube. It's not universal. The first thing we do is get the tubes out, check they're correct, check the wall thicknesses, sand the edges, make sure it's all really clean, because if it's not clean, the tubes won't join together correctly. We build in steel because I still believe it's one of the best materials to use. It's been used in bikes since the late 1800s, and they're still using it now for a very good reason. It's the flexibility that we can replace the tube, repaint the bike, and you wouldn't know it's damaged. I just like working with it. It's very sculptural. This isn't sort of aerospace precision engineering. It's a steel rule and a marker. So when we're cutting the tubes, it's within a mil or two. But what we're trying to do is take the best from bicycle building in the past and add a little bit of modern flair to it. There's various techniques for building bicycles. We do a thing called fillet brazing, where you connect a pipe together. We use a bronze rod and a flame. We heat the tubes up to the same temperature and we fill the joint with bronze. And it gives a very, very sort of fluid, lovely, sort of quite sculptural feel. You've got to practice. You've got to be able to judge material temperatures. You've got to just look at it and you just get a feel for it. It's a stage where your tubes start to look a bit like a bicycle. My father's a jeweller. He'd make sort of very pretty things, which are lovely, but for me, they don't really have any function. What I love about bicycles, you can start on a Monday with a box of tubes. You can be riding it by the weekend, and it can last you for the rest of your life. Outside of the frame and forks, the other most important part is the wheels and tyres. When you build the wheels, you have to lace them, so there's little holes going all the way around the rim. You poke the spoke through. We do build all our wheels by hand here because a machine can't get 30 years worth of wheel building experience. Colour is very, very personal. With any of our bikes, you can have them painted whatever colour you want. We've matched one to the teapot, so we can get that scanned and we can match that, or someone's favourite item of clothing. I like to let the bike sit for 4 or 5 days minimum, just so the paint can have time to cure a little bit, and then we assemble it. We get out all the new components, and it's a case of putting them together. Some bikes you can assemble in 3 hours, some will take 3 days. And we've built bikes that cost in the £10,000 plus mark. Some people, they're saving up and this is their bike and they're going to own it for the rest of their lives. So we just want to make sure they get the right thing. I think the bike for me was the first time I had some freedom. So as soon as I had one, I was off. lot of people still get that thrill as when they were a kid blasting down a hill, wind going through their hair. It's fun. Everyone has their favourite jacket or something that just makes them feel good. If you've got a bike that fits well, you actually feel part of it. Building bicycles as a creative outlet is fantastic. It's not something you do because you're going to get a big paycheck at the end of the day. You do it something you have a passion for it.
If you ever saw a wooden surfboard, it was probably hanging in somebody's house or underneath the deck. But kind of in the last 10 or 15 years, wood has made a big comeback. They surf wonderfully. It's beautiful and it feels great to be on one of them. I always had a love for wood and kind of passionate about things that went in the water. I've kind of been around wooden boats most of my life. There's just so much character. The way they're built, the stories that come with them, a lot of that has translated over to why we build surfboards the way we do. When we first started thinking about building surfboards, wood was the natural material we chose. They have a very high strength to weight ratio. Wooden surfboards have the longest history of use in the surf world than any other material. People have been surfing wooden surfboards since kind of the first documented history of people riding waves. The board starts in CAD, where we take a 3D model, break down the shape, and kind of create frames and templates and all the inner parts of the board that we get cut on a CNC machine. We take those frames and we just pop them out, assemble the frame into kind of a skeleton. go out to our lumber shed, pick a bunch of cedar, and bring them into our mill shop, put glue along the edges, clamp it all together into a panel. Everything's book matched, you have symmetry in the colors and texture of the wood. Cut your outline. Take our assembled frame, gently put it down right on top of the plank. Once that foundation is started, you're basically building up the three-dimensional shape, the outside part of the board, using lots of strips that kind of interlock and fit together. Every piece of wood is going to be different, and it's all going to react differently. There are frustrations with it, but I think that's one of the things that keeps it challenging. You learn to read the kind of what the grain lines are doing and what the color of the wood is telling you. Once those rails are cleaned up, we put our top planks on. It's a little bit like putting a lid on a box. It's like, this is it. Whatever's inside that board is staying inside that board. And by tensioning some rope, you can clamp the two together. It's like a time capsule. What makes our boards unique are they are built right here in York. They're built using material that grows right here in the state of Maine. They're built 100% by hand by local craftspeople and surfers. There's a lot of time that goes into these boards, between 40 and 60 hours, start to finish. We wanted to build surfboards that were as hollow as they could be, but still be strong enough to work well. Too light and they don't surf well, but too heavy and they don't surf well. So there's a balance point there, and that's where we try to be. Taking the board off the rocker table once the top has gone on, that is by far one of my top favorite parts. It's just you and a shaping stand, a board, and a hand plane. Everything else is out of your view. It's simple, it's pleasurable, it's quiet. You can be with your thoughts and you can just kind of be present. There's something about taking a nice sharp edge tool to a beautiful piece of wood and feeling the curls coming off and knowing that every pass that you're making, you're kind of getting it closer and closer to what you have in mind. Once we've shaped it down and the board's looking like it's supposed to look like, time for it to go into the glassing room. 4-ounce fiberglass, laying it over the board, draping it over the edges, cutting it, applying epoxy, and on the board. Once both sides are lamb coated, it's time to put in the hardware. Drill and router and install the fin box. And on the other side, we drill and put in the leash plug and a vent. There's a lot of air just naturally inside the board, and that air wants to expand and contract with temperature changes. And that vent has a little piece of Gore-Tex fabric in it, and it allows air to kind of breathe both ways, but it doesn't allow water to get in. Once all that hardware is put in, it goes back into the glassing room. We brush a nice, beautiful, thick coat of epoxy over the whole surface, and that we call a gloss coat. That's supposed to look beautiful and glossy and shiny and flawless. You get to see that board come to life. Whatever the colors in the wood, they really come out. It just makes it look like candy. You just want to touch it and run your hands down it, and it's just kind of the icing on the cake. Once everything is hard, we put it into what we call the oven, get that epoxy to cure, really kind of bake it, and just get it to harden. Put in the fin, screw in the vent, and ship it out. We just love the idea of building something that's sustainable and long-lasting and made by hand. Kind of gives you a deeper connection to the product over something you might buy on a shelf. When a customer gets the board, they feel it. They 100% feel the amount of work and the amount of passion that went into the board. So I'm not really looking at hours and efficiency. We're looking at like doing it right and enjoying it as we go.
Ma Baoli, better known as Gang La, is one of the 4 Grand Marshals leading New York's Pride Parade this year. But in the country he comes from, being gay is still a social taboo. The CEO of a Beijing-based internet company is on a mission to improve the lives of millions of gay men in China.
对于每一个 LGBT 人群来说，即使这个国家不允许你跟同性爱人结婚，但是你仍然要勇敢地去选择你自己的生活，你仍然应该拥有幸福生活的权利。
Ma's company Blue City runs an app and a website specifically for gay men. Blued is one of the biggest gay social networking apps in the world, with an estimated 30 million registered users. Unlike most other apps, Blued is more than just dating or hookups.
大家可以在我们这个软件里面找他自己的情感，然后可以阅读相关的内容，然后可以进行一些娱乐，比如玩游戏啊，比如看直播啊等等。
Back in 2000, when Ma studied at a police school in northern China, he realized he didn't feel like everyone else.
因为他们都找女朋友，然后谈恋爱，但是我对长得好看的同性的男生，我反而觉得对我更有吸引力。所以那个时候我就到互联网上去找这样的一些资料，然后希望能够告诉我自己我到底是谁。互联网上所有的信息都是负面的，都是错的，就是说同性恋要电击疗法，要被治疗，然后要吃药等等。
After visiting some foreign websites with different attitudes to homosexuality, Ma created his own site for a Chinese audience, encouraging people that
他们也是正常的，他们不用自卑，然后也不用自杀。
even though attitudes towards homosexuals are slowly changing in China, it's still a social stigma. The virtual world of Blued, where members can be open about their sexuality, is for most a striking contrast to their real lives. This is live streaming, a function added to Blued in late 2015, right as the internet craze was starting to take off in China. Many self-made stars like Jin make decent amounts of money by receiving audiences' virtual currencies and gifts.
我们不是彼此的初恋，初恋这种事儿都不靠谱啊。
For Kyle and Klaus, a couple who have come out, live streaming on Blued means something different.
其实我经常会收到很多粉丝的一些互动的留言，就是类似就是说你们让我们看到了同志情侣之间的一些希望啊，我看到这样的留言我是很欣慰。
The government's rules for acceptable content online may shift quickly in China, with LGBT material in a grey area. Many companies feel the chill of the recent internet crackdown, but Blue City still runs as usual. Ma has won the Chinese government's trust by helping with HIV prevention among gay men. A third of the company's staff are dedicated to screening pornographic and politically sensitive content.
我不太多的愿意去对抗，我更多的愿意去对话，去改变他们的想法。我觉得这个可能在中国来说是更有效的。
In the past 5 years, Blue City has grown from a team of 7 people to a promising business with about 250 staff. Ma said the company earned over $15 million last year, mainly through advertising and selling virtual currencies to live streaming audiences. Now the company is expanding overseas.
我希望吧，通过我们的努力，Blue能够成为全球第一家在美国纳斯达克或者是纽交所上市的这样的同志互联网公司。
This is Rich Chiga. He's a Chinese rapper by way of Indonesia, and he's very popular on the internet. This is Joji. He's a Japanese-Australian singer, and he's also very popular on the internet. Plus, Joji invented the Harlem Shake meme. Let me say that again. This guy, Joji, in the blood bathtub, invented the Harlem Shake meme. But we'll come back to that. So Rich and Joji are both signed to 88 Rising, an entertainment company hoping to build a lasting global brand that will outlive singular moments of virality. They primarily create content combining Asian culture and hip-hop, a formula that apparently pleases the internet gods greatly. They've only been around for 18 months, but they're already putting up major label numbers.
I think that we have an unprecedented collective of talent, a group of predominantly Asian artists, really making waves globally, which from an independent point of view as well.
88's founder, Sean Miyashiro, cut his teeth launching Vice's electronic music channel, Thump. But quickly, Sean became interested in life beyond dance music.
I knew that after launching a whole content platform that I have kind of the ability and the know-how to do it again, but for what was the question.
So Sean moved to the Bronx to start over and figure it out. He couldn't afford an office space, so he worked out of his car at the top of a grimy parking garage.
Everything kind of started here. If you look around, this is my environment. This is my serenity, really. 88 Rising was built here. Built on the grounds of LA Fitness residence in a parking garage. I was living in the Bronx. I'm just damn, where the hell do I go? So I just come up here and I I just kind of figure things out every single day. Being okay, what the hell is this thing? Coming here was kind of my own kind of private office, basically. To be honest, I would even go to the bathroom here. I would take pisses here, you know what I mean? It was, it's just too far to go back down there. When I need Wi-Fi, I'd spend a good part of the day at Dunkin' Donuts. Hi, how are you? Can I get a chicken snack wrap?
Before 88 Rising officially launched, Sean caught a surprise break in the form of a Twitter friendship with a funny 16-year-old kid from Indonesia named Brian, who taught himself English by watching Rubik's Cube tutorial videos on YouTube. Seriously, that's true.
I thought his Twitter was genius, from the future, just crazy, and just the shit that he was saying, the memes he was making. But I didn't know that he rapped or anything like that. I really didn't, and he came up with that stick 2 weeks later.
12 in the morning, pop shells for a living and baby gon' smell blood trail every minute, bro.
Dat Stick was Brian's first ever attempt at making a rap song, and it immediately went viral.
Everything was great about it, but the one thing that I noticed is the song was hard as hell. Just everything about it, man. Just it was menacing, bro.
Soon after the video dropped, Brian signed with 88 Rising.
I'll FaceTime with Rich. Sorry for calling you Rich Chiga on my phone, Rich. Brian, he gets super pissed off that he's saved in my phone as Rich Chiga. He's dude, am I not a human to you? What's good, bro?
What's good, brother?
How you doing?
Doing great. I did the sound check.
How was it?
It was tight. But you been a bitch, suck a thick cock.
So Brian could definitely rap, but some viewers understandably took offense at a Chinese kid satirizing rap cliches and calling himself Rich Chiga. But if a group of well-known rappers saw the video and genuinely liked it, that could at least help validate Brian as a legit hip-hop artist. Plus, it could be really funny.
It was just kind of an idea that I just had on the spot. Everything that rappers say is better and funnier and smarter and wittier. It's just more entertaining. We just edit it as tight as possible, put it up, and it really worked.
12 in the morning, pop shows.
Yo, this nigga got a pouch on and a Reebok pouch. This is the hardest nigga of all time.
He said, when you come for a chigga like me, that was dope.
Like, it's just lit, and I think people will take it as a joke at first, but it's like if he ran with that and kept doing more videos like that, it's just lit.
You know, I'd never been to America before, and like all of a sudden, just like I see like all the rappers that I listen to just like reacting to my stuff, and I was like, what? How did this happen?
The reaction video also went viral and even led to a remix of Dat Stick featuring Wu-Tang's Ghostface.
I'll get on that track. You know what I'm saying? Yeah.
Really, on the remix?
Yeah. Oh, you know him?
And yeah, the remix went viral too. Brian has since acknowledged the misstep in his name and claims he may change it. But for the time being, he's still Rich Chigga to his fans. An ever-growing global audience, hungry for more releases from emerging talent around the world.
I didn't know that it was gonna be this impactful and this important to people, and I'm very thankful and blessed that it has. And every day now that I wake up, it's like it's just like a new mission every day.
A major part of that mission involves Joji. Remember the bloody bath guy? He's a former YouTube personality in the middle of a career transition.
The sound of this song, Will He, it's like a trap song that you can like slow dance to. Awkward prom shit, you know what I mean? I used to do crazy episodic internet videos. It was going well, and one day it was me and a few friends just in a room. We were casually chilling, and then someone plays the song, and it's brand new at the time. I happened to have a lot of costumes laying around, so I told the other guys, I was like, get in these costumes and let's just dance to it. Like, who cares? We were like, okay, let's just go crazy at the drop. So that video goes up. I go to sleep, and the next morning, everyone's doing it. Like, next morning. That taught me a lot about the internet, how people want to just be a part of something. And from that point on, something changed, and I was a little better at understanding demographics and people and, what they want to see and what they want to hear. I was friends with a couple other artists who were affiliated with 88, and then I also started to realize that 88 is the bridge between Western and Asian entertainment, and I really wanted to be a part of that.
Joji just released the In Tongues EP, his first project as a serious artist.
Joji's In Tongues record came out a couple weeks ago. It's #2 on Billboard on the R&B charts, which is crazy for, independent release, and he's like a brand new artist.
And the success is even more impressive, knowing he went from creating something like this.
It's just Taco Bell. What could possibly go wrong?
To creating something Tonight, Rich Chigga has a show in New York City. Tickets sold out in an hour.
I came here, I'm first online. I was
here at 1.
Yeah, I was the third person online.
So why'd you get here so early?
Because I want to see Rich Chigga. I want to touch him.
What do you guys think of Joji?
Oh my
God! That's my dad, son.
You guys cop the new EP or like?
Yeah. I woke up at 6 in the morning just to cop that shit. And then I listened to it, and that shit started making me cry.
This is actually kind of exciting. Every time, this never gets old. Like, you live online and social media, but like, there's nothing like just being with the people.
More often than not, viral success happens by accident. And then after an appearance on Ellen or Jimmy Kimmel, the creator's star power fizzles out. But Idiot Rising has figured out how to turn potential gimmicks into brands with an actual following that keeps coming back for the next thing.
Oh, shit!
So keep an eye out for Idiot's next move. But more than likely, it won't be covered on network television or terrestrial radio. Although, as they've already proven, nowadays that really doesn't matter.
Online retailer Farfetch is betting it can shape the future. This is its concept store, showcasing the latest in retail tech.
How do you capture all of that fantastic information that you gather in store with customers, touch and feel products? And we created a concept called the connected rail. And this is using a combination of RFID and ultrasound. The RFID signal recognizes the product, and the ultrasound recognizes the movement. Take the product off, and then you'll start to see your products appear. And essentially, it's like online browsing behavior. Whichever products you touch and pick up in the store are automatically sent to your app. This is effectively what you've created is your in-store wish list. In the middle, you'll see essentially a hologram of the product. What the customer sees, they control the experience on a touch device. What this allows the customer to do is take elements of products and then add their own style to it. Right, so this is the connected mirror. So in this example, I see my products. I select a coat, and that's tried it, and it's slightly too big for me. So what I can do is choose an alternative size and send a request to the sales associate, and they'll bring that size to me in the fitting room mirror. You'll also see that we've got some product recommendations here. Crucially, the sales associate's able to push items into the mirror from their device. If you wanted to, you could simply use the mirror and pay and go. Your items would then be packed and dispatched to you afterwards.
Do you want me to turn you so you're looking outwards? Yes, please. How about there? First time we came out with B, Jade said, it feels like I've been released from prison. Do you want these, Mrs?
Definitely.
Definitely. Right. Yeah. And she could say hello to everybody, people she hadn't seen for months.
It's
Hi, it's
Jade.
Jade.
Oh. So you can talk to Jade through this.
Hi, Katie. She's there.
Hi.
Every time anyone's seen her, they want to know why she's there. And it's kind of the opposite of when you're in a wheelchair and people see you and they kind of go, oh, should I look? I don't know what the right protocol is. When there's a tiny robot with its bright little eyes going around just looking happy everywhere, it really opens you up for conversation.
You've got some friends here, look.
Hiya! When I saw her for the first time, I remember thinking, this is going to change things. This is one of those points where if this was a book, this would be the cliffhanger. condition called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which means that I have a lot of dislocations, there's a lot of pain, and a lot of seizures and whatnot. So I can end up on my own in my room for long periods of time. A lot of the time, with a condition like my own, of course there's the pain, and the pain is bad, and the dislocations are bad, and the seizures and being in paralysis and never knowing whether you're going to be able to wake up properly tomorrow, that's bad. But what's worse still is being able to count the number of people you see a day on one hand.
Are you ready?
Sure am, I'm just hoping the connection's going to stay.
Yeah, me too. Alright, here we go.
When you're used to just the same little metre by metre and a half window every day, and you've been there for months, being able to just see the sky from somewhere else, or the tops of trees, or a sign, is incredible. Or being able to have that kind of chat in the car that most people would probably take for granted.
I'm going to go past Grandma and Grandad so you can give them a wave. Now, if Jade is particularly seizure-y, she can still take part. And that's brilliant, really, because before she would just be left in a bed or in the house with just her carers. It's quite a small world, that.
Right, so there's one of her. Here, this costume I'm busy making at the moment. When I'm not on bed rest and I'm not just wearing pyjamas all the time, I enjoy being able to dress as different characters and go to Comic Cons and that kind of thing, because it just lets me show a different side of myself, and it's a bit of fun. If you can't go out that often, you've got to enjoy it when you do. Was that? Good. It's one of those weird things where I want to not have to use B because I want to be well enough to be able to go to those places myself. Like, it really makes a big difference to me to be able to go into school. But the thing is, with my condition fluctuating all of the time, I can't go into school reliably. Today's the first day that I've been in school via B, and so far it's interesting. Still a few little things that we need to work out, but for the most part I think it's gone fairly well. And it's brilliant because I can really tell the difference between today and yesterday. How yesterday I forced myself to go into school when I wasn't very well, and I was really tired afterwards and ended up having loads of seizures. Whereas today I've been able to do all of the work, I've been able to keep a clear head and not be ill, which means I'm able to be more focused on my schoolwork.
So there is my first step of working, is to simplify root 8. The algebra test is next week.
Now I'm trying to make friendships which I'll be able to maintain with B. Before that, I end up letting people down quite often. B gives me hope, yeah. She's just always there, and if I can't do something, she can, and if I need sort of assistance to be able to make commitments, then she's there, and she means that I feel like a more valuable person because I'm more reliable.
When it debuted, the 4G wireless we have today allowed people for the first time to hit the road and explore unknown places with only a smartphone for directions. When 5G arrives, it could enable driverless cars to take us there as well. 5G stands for fifth generation mobile networks or wireless systems. It's insanely fast and can accommodate a lot more connected devices. But the reason it's being called revolutionary is because 5G will allow connected devices to speak to each other as well as people.
Right now we're living in a world where really it's a one-way experience.
That's Bloomberg tech reporter Ian King.
The network talks to your phone, you look at your phone and access data, then you send something back to the network. What we're being told about 5G is that really for the first time we're going to see machines communicating with each other over mobile networks in a meaningful way.
5G could end up being 100 times faster than what we have now, with speeds that could reach 20 gigabits per second. In plain English, that means downloading a full-length HD movie in seconds. 5G will also increase total bandwidth, which we will need in order to accommodate the growing Internet of Things. We're talking about the class of devices like internet-connected refrigerators, thermostats, dog collars, but 5G will enable many, many more.
Things like your utility network, factories, where machines are just sat there, not connected at all. Suddenly they're all going to be connected. Suddenly we're going to be able to have real-time monitoring. Other things like cars, like utility poles, like your light, the light poles.
But perhaps the biggest advance will be a huge reduction in communication lag time, known as latency. A network of driverless cars will need the speed of 5G to ping each other multiple times per second to avoid collisions. Near instantaneous data transfers could allow doctors to perform surgery remotely with a robotic scalpel. So how will all this work? First, you need to improve network density.
And that's just a fancy word for saying you put more towers out there. What we're being told is that's not actually the case with 5G.
The idea is 5G will not only use the existing mobile spectrum, but also tap into higher frequencies called millimeter waves. Millimeter waves can carry more data, but only travel short distances. This may mean you'll see a lot more of these base stations around town. And the new towers may have as many as 100 antenna ports, compared to about a dozen on 4G cell towers. So when will we get 5G? Getting 5G ready is expected to cost providers $275 billion over 7 years in the US alone. Look for the first 5G service to pop up in big cities sometime in 2019.
The cubicle represents a tyranny. It confines your imagination, your thoughts, into a small physical area. Imagine pretty much every software engineer or finance person being able to, disconnect from their desk and look at holographic monitors on a beach and doing their work from there. That's not going to be science fiction. It's the modern office place.
Silicon Valley is all about building the future. A startup called Meta thinks it's getting there first, thanks to a big bet that it's made on augmented reality.
How are you?
Good, thank you. Welcome to Meta.
Thank you.
Call it a 360-degree office where you can spatialize your thoughts as part of your workflow for education, architecture, design, engineering, etc.
People often mix up augmented reality with virtual reality. VR totally blocks your ability to see or hear the real world. AR overlays holograms onto what you already see. Meta has tried to make its version of the workspace feel familiar.
You grab the hologram instead of using a controller or a mouse, and your brain already knows how to do it. In other words, we've designed an operating system that humanity has always known how to use. So you can see this eyeball, which is, by the way, photorealistic. You can see my hand is occluding the eyeball, and now the eyeball is occluding my hand, right? You see those two circles? They get small, and then they turn into this glowing white ball, and then I can move my hand around supernaturally. I can do this with two hands and rotate the thing. I can stretch it. I can throw it back right into the shelving system, and that's all you have to learn to become a modern worker.
And to prove this, the employees at Meta have started to get rid of their computer monitors, trading them in for Meta's augmented reality headsets. Mayron thinks that in less than a decade, we'll all be just wearing strips of glass that can project holograms.
In the early 80s, everybody had computers on their desktop, but no one was using them because they had a lot of work to do. So they were still using typewriters. And at some point, the CEO took all the typewriters away and everybody was forced to use their computers. So it's very exciting to see a new generation of technology, a new paradigm.
I consider us like pioneers in the holographic wild. I'm pulling up my browser with my hands and sending out emails to colleagues and just kind of really acclimating to the new environment.
Now you're putting on my computer, essentially. Our digital lives live on our phones. We have all of our pictures and notes and all these kinds of things. So, and why don't you write yourself a little sticky note? I like it. And go ahead and just take your fist right over the top of the sticky note and close your fist. And now.
Oh, what?
Meta's own transition to augmented reality has run into plenty of unexpected problems. And it's still going to be a while before you'll start to see these devices in your office. But I think it's a future worth waiting for.
If we could see these holograms between us, we will have been able to share our work with one another more naturally, more efficiently, and more productively than ever before. Humanity will have evolved slightly.
This is Hatsune Miku, Japan's sensational virtual pop star. She's released over 100,000 songs in multiple languages and performed sold-out concerts around the world. Her image has appeared in games, on TV, in car races, and is even etched on the side of a Japanese space rocket.
I came for Hatsune Miku, Carlos.
She's Lady Gaga's favorite digital pop star and opened shows for her in the US 3 years ago. Tens of thousands of fans attended her exhibition and live shows near Tokyo recently.
理想のアイドルっていうとどの曲でもミクはすごい綺麗に歌ってくれる。
他没有缺点啊，没有任何让我们感到不開心的一些新聞。
She's everything to everybody. That's probably why she's so popular.
Miku's creator Hiroyuki Ito and his Sapporo-based company have been developing the virtual diva for over 10 years.
初音ミクとはキャラクターとしてすごくYouTube とかで検索するとたくさんの初音ミクが出てくるんですけども、元々の初音ミクのその原点は歌声を合成するソフトウェアなんです。
Both the software and character are named Hatsune Miku, meaning the first sound of the future. Originally based on Yamaha's Vocaloid technology, Miku the software has a sound bank containing voice samples and a huge array of tools. You input the melody and lyrics, then Miku the character sings them. To date, Krypton has sold 120,000 software licenses at $200 each to fans around the world who use it to create numerous songs and share them online. Some of the fan-created songs are chosen to be part of Miku's concerts, for which they're paid a royalty fee.
もともと初音ミクっていう存在自体がボトムアップって言いますか、中にはアマチュアクリエイターじゃなくて今もうすでにプロになって活躍している方もいらっしゃるんですけども。
The company also has other revenue streams. It makes money from merchandising, licensing deals, and concert ticket sales. According to the real-life musicians who perform with Hatsune Miku, the virtual pop star is interesting and surprising.
今年で3年ぐらい、ちょうど3年ぐらいやってきて、ライブも数十本数百本だったので、そういうことが演奏によって起こせるためのそういう器みたいな感じになってます。初音ミクらしさって僕はあんまりない。初音ミクって何だってありっていうか。
For Ito, Miku has the potential to change the way we think about music.
そういう新しいテクノロジーによって新しい音楽のあり方っていうものを模索していきたいと思っていました。
And for her fans, it goes even further.
ミクって魂がないので、だからみんなに魂を作り上げるために存在する。
Now, there are a lot of fitness gadgets out there. In my quest to get fit, I tested 17 of them over the last few months. At least one personal trainer I know was a little bit skeptical.
Yeah, I've been watching these new technologies come to the market for almost as long as I've been a personal trainer. They're just tricks and tropes. They're not much different than the Bowflex machines or, to be honest, the original Jane Fonda workout video.
But some of these gadgets that are just coming to the market do so much more than what they used to do, just tracking your activities. Out of all of them, this chest strap was my favorite. It comes with a robot coach that points to the future, one where you might not need a human trainer at all. And it works like this. You wear the chest strap so that it can read your heart rate, and that connects to Move's free app that talks to you.
Welcome to Move Heart Rate Hit Outdoor Running. Let's get moving and warm up in Zone 2.
Move's computerized coach tells you what to do at that exact moment, whether you're running outside or you're doing body weight exercises indoors.
Swing your arms faster to get your legs moving quicker. Let's crush this round.
And by reading your heart rate, she knows exactly how hard you're working. She keeps you honest.
Way to go, you are in the target zone. Keep pushing, you're almost at the end of the round. Don't give up.
I've been running for 7 years now, and my biggest problem is that I never push myself hard enough. I end up going on the same slow, comfortable 30-minute jog, but the Move HR Burn blasted me out of that rut. By the end of these half-hour exercises, I was drenched in sweat in a way that I never am when I work out alone. Training with a real person is great, whether that's your group instructor or your coach or your personal trainer. But humans, they're expensive. For the rest of us, this $60 gadget is all you need.
what does it take to change the world? A big army? A cure to a pandemic? A revolution? All of these take either a lot of people, thousands of hours, or massive amounts of space. But for Julian Assange, all he needs is one room, an internet connection, and the world will listen. Assange is located here, and more specifically, right here. And from that location, he's posted government secrets, classified documents, and leaked emails from some of the world's most powerful people. And in doing so, has been labeled a hero, a villain, a nihilist, and everything in between. This is how an Australian programmer sequestered in the Ecuadorian embassy in London became one of the most influential and notorious people in the world. Born in 1971 in Townsville, Australia, Assange has always been on the move. Living in over 30 homes by the time he was in his mid-teens, Assange, along with his mother and half-brother, finally settled down in Melbourne. His introduction to hacking started at 16 when he was given a Commodore 64, which he attached to a modem. He attended the University of Melbourne, where he studied programming, physics, and mathematics. He never graduated, but that doesn't mean he didn't get an education. By 1991, Assange hacked into the Pentagon, U.S. Navy, and other branches of the U.S. government. In 1996, he was caught by the Australian Federal Police and charged with over 30 counts of hacking and computer-related crimes. He didn't get any jail time, but he was fined $2,100.
I think the first taste of what would come later was the hacking that he did as a young programmer, and that really sort of foreshadowed a healthy skepticism of the use and abuse of technology by governments.
That's Vernon Silver.
I'm a reporter for Bloomberg's investigations team.
Assange's youth as a hacker laid the foundation for him to start WikiLeaks in 2006. But what is WikiLeaks? It's a website that posts unfiltered, usually classified documents. What separates it from every other media outlet is that they have no editorial hierarchy. With a publication like the New York Times, information comes in, they take that information, package it, then disseminate it for the public to see. WikiLeaks, however, cuts out the middleman.
WikiLeaks gathers information, most of it given to them anonymously. So what they're doing is really very simple. They get the information in one end from who gives it to them and out the other with sometimes minimal interference. Julian Assange is the leader of that, the mastermind, the creator, and really, because he thinks of it as a journalistic enterprise, the editor-in-chief.
But every story starts with a source, and Assange has some unconventional sources.
Julian Assange does not hack as far as we know. He is the recipient of people who are either insiders who give him secret documents or hacked emails from a foreign power.
That's Eli Lake.
I am a columnist for Bloomberg.
And there was no source bigger for Assange than Chelsea Manning, who used to be known as U.S. soldier Bradley Manning. In 2010, Manning provided Assange and WikiLeaks with hundreds of thousands of leaked government documents. WikiLeaks quietly began releasing the documents in February of 2010, then made big headlines in April by posting what is now known as the Collateral murder video.
Come on, fire! It was a vivid, graphic video. It changed the debate on the Iraq War, and importantly, it put WikiLeaks on the map when they put it online, and they couldn't be ignored at that point.
And those leaks were just the beginning. They went on to post more than 90,000 leaked documents known as the Afghan war logs, 390,000 documents known as the Iraq war logs, and 250,000 private messages between diplomats called cables in what is now known as Cablegate. These leaks were met with very real ethical questions.
The problem with publishing those cables was that a number of confidential sources for U.S. diplomats who faced real danger when their names were exposed.
Then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton drove the point home that
every country, including the United States, must be able to have candid conversations about the people and nations with whom they deal.
Shortly after Cablegate, the Swedish government issued an arrest warrant for Assange on allegations of rape and molestation. He claimed the allegations were fabricated to get him extradited to the United States, a claim the U.S. government denied. Either way, Assange's next move was
to seek refuge in the Ecuadorian embassy, which really was the beginning of the new chapter in his life and what we're dealing with now, which is him being stuck in London.
What was supposed to be an office in an embassy is now Assange's self-imposed prison to this very day. But that doesn't mean he's slowed down. Since being trapped in the embassy, WikiLeaks has released files about Guantanamo Bay prisoners, Syrian political figures, and the draft to the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And then came the 2016 U.S. election.
Thousands of leaked emails showed Democratic Party officials possibly plotting against Bernie Sanders in his race against Hillary Clinton.
Over the course of 68 days, WikiLeaks released 20,000 confidential Democratic National Committee emails. In terms of the presidential race, if you look right here, when Assange released the first batch of emails, Trump actually takes his first lead against Clinton.
I think we've had enough of the Clintons, in all fairness. Don't you think?
Once WikiLeaks started exposing secrets of the Democratic Party, Julian Assange became a hero to many on the right. Public opinion kind of flip-flopped.
WikiLeaks!
From the emails, we now know Hillary Clinton's campaign manager makes risotto, and also how the DNC squashed Bernie Sanders' campaign. One thing we don't know is who gave Assange the stolen emails in the first place.
Many leading Democrats say they suspect it was the Russians. They released an analysis from a private cybersecurity firm that had said it was the Russians.
But Assange claims
our source is not the Russian government, and it is not a state party.
So this is where we stand today. The public still doesn't know who provided the emails to WikiLeaks. Meanwhile, Assange is still running WikiLeaks and still releasing documents. In March 2017, he started publishing documents from the CIA's Center for Cyber Intelligence called Vault 7.
The CIA, the agency charged with finding and keeping our top secrets, can't keep its own secrets.
As long as Assange has a connection to the world, no government secret will be too far from exposure.
Julian Assange is still in the embassy. Maybe he'll leave, maybe he won't. Kind of regardless, his work has been done. He's changed the way people think about their governments, about their own secrets, about their own hackability, and really the world has changed because of him.
Expose everything you won't admit. And action. This entire video is based on a true story. When I do like motivational speeches or even tell myself like love yourself and you should love yourself.
This is Lily Singh.
But to fans all over the world, she's the YouTube star Superwoman.
What if everyone is a girl, Superwoman? I know we can change the world for the better, one positive day at a time.
My parents now know what I do. They didn't know what I did for a long time in the beginning of my career. I was just making videos in my room. They had no idea.
Mom, Dad, have you seen my keys? I can't find them anywhere. Because you're always on phone.
Until someone called them, like a family member from another part of Canada, was like, Canada, is your daughter making videos? And my mom was like, I don't know, Lily, are you making videos?
Just making videos grew into an entire career. Today, Lily's YouTube channel has some 12 million subscribers, over 2 billion views, and guest stars like Michelle Obama, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, and Seth Rogen.
I think a lot of young girls are raised to believe that you're going to go to school and then graduate and then get married and then get a job and then have kids.
And Lily was on that path, all the way through a psychology degree at York University in Toronto. But when she started thinking about a career,
I started to immensely panic and think something was wrong with me because I tried to figure out my life and it wasn't working in that straight line.
It was 2010, and YouTube was only 5 years old.
I thought nothing of YouTube. I was probably the last person in my circle of friends to discover YouTube. And I remember when I did, I thought, this is so strange. There's people making videos in their rooms, and other people are watching them.
So she figured, why not give it a shot?
I one day posted a video because I was sad, and I wanted to be creative and happy.
She didn't know how to edit video or write scripts, so she winged it.
It was so bad and so cringe, and my expectation was literally nothing. I was like, I'm gonna put this video up, a couple of my friends are gonna watch it, probably make fun of me, and that's gonna be the end of this. The second and third video came from, wait, 70 people watched my first one, can I get 80 to watch the next one?
She kept creating, she kept posting, and the viewers kept coming. Lily had found an audience.
A lot of the comments were, oh my God, there's a brown girl on YouTube.
More specifically, Indian. Lily's parents immigrated to Canada from India, and Lily was born and raised in Scarborough, near Toronto.
My home life was awesome. My parents, even though I portrayed them to be quite strict in my videos.
Oh, Lily, where the rest of your skirt, huh? I teach you like this, to walk around like this, showing everything to everyone?
They actually aren't like that at all. They're pretty modern and pretty cool.
Your dress is short. Don't know what for.
And were pretty lenient with me. I mean, I got away with a lot of things. I was a brat. I was a brat.
She had a different idea of what she wanted out of life than other kids. In a grade school graduation slideshow, her classmates said they wanted to be lawyers and doctors.
And then I came up and I was like, rapper.
Making out with your friends, man. But then you say that you hate hoes.
I could just feel my parents being like, why?
Because that's just not something women really did in the Singh family.
I know there was a ton of people that weren't happy about my birth being a female, so I think, and that's some real-ish, but it's a real thing. The best thing I could have done to prove to so many people that didn't want my mom to have a daughter was to become Superwoman.
What up, everyone? It's your girl, Superwoman.
It was the name of Lily's favorite hip-hop song by Lil Mo featuring Fabulous.
I love the song so much because it was one of the only songs at the time that was an empowering female song, where Lil Mo's going on about, like, I will save guys with my superpowers, and I will save girls with my superpowers, and I am the Superwoman. I thought, this name that I've had for so long that empowered me when I was younger, I'm gonna make this my screen name.
Maybe there should be a new series.
Superwoman didn't just burst onto the scene overnight with a viral video. It was a steady climb fueled by hard work.
The moment that I thought this is going somewhere and this could be a career was the first time I performed internationally. It was in India. And it was the first time where I was truly across the world and people knew my videos.
Singh has transformed herself from a bratty kid to an internet personality to a media mogul. She starred in a feature film, A Trip to Unicorn Island, in 2016. And her book, How to Be a Boss, hit the New York Times bestseller list in 2017 while she was on a 30-city international tour. Lily started out with the goal of getting millions of subscribers and financial security.
Hurry the hell up!
But after surpassing those goals, success has new meaning.
I've really come to terms with the fact that my definition of success is what's the best legacy I can leave behind. And it's not the number of views and the number of subscribers. It is the number of people that can say, this girl changed my life or changed something in my life positively.
CTE is often found in the brains of deceased athletes, military veterans, and others with a history of repetitive brain trauma. Hundreds have donated their brains to the VA Boston University Concussion Legacy Foundation Brain Bank.
This is a former NFL player who died in his early 70s, and this is a veteran who also died in his early 70s.
Dr. Ann McKee dissects these brains.
The hippocampus and the mammillary bodies are very important for memory. I can see that they're slightly affected.
McKee recently dissected the brain of former New England Patriots player Aaron Hernandez, who was convicted of murder and later committed suicide.
You'll see right away that the brain is showing signs of shrinkage. You can see the crevices in the brain that you can't see in the normal.
McKee says Hernandez's severe case of CTE impacted his decision-making, depression, and ability to control rage and aggression. Right now, she thinks we're underestimating how many people have CTE.
We were able to distinguish between CTE and controls and CTE and Alzheimer's disease. The next question is, can we do this in the blood, and can we do this in living people? And we aren't there yet with those answers.
But the need for a diagnosis in the living is motivating companies such as Quanterix in Lexington, Massachusetts, to work faster on technology that could diagnose concussions and CTE in as few as 30 minutes. Kevin Rosovsky is the CEO.
It's like a high-powered microscope. And so by doing that, we can see little biomarkers that you couldn't see before in the blood.
Quanterix received a grant from the NFL and just went public. Since then, its stock is up more than 40%. The company sells a machine called Simoa for $175,000 to other biotechs, hospitals, and researchers.
And for the first time in history, we're able to see brain health in blood, and that's a major breakthrough, and that's leading to less invasive testing, and we've already been able to see evidence of concussions, and there's the beginning evidence of being able to see the accumulated effect of concussions.
Quanterix is also trying to detect Alzheimer's disease, multiple sclerosis, and ALS. Rosovsky says he thinks diagnosing concussions will be easier than diagnosing CTE.
Diagnosing CT in the living probably is a couple years away. We're real excited to see the progress, but reducing some of that work into actual tests in a laboratory takes time. There's regulatory approvals. There's a lot of red tape that you have to go through.
Also in this race to diagnose CTE in the blood are Athlon Medical and Exosome Sciences. And New York's Mount Sinai Hospital is scanning for the disease in the living. But it's just one step in a series of questions for those with serious head trauma. There's still no cure for CTE.
Even if we had a great idea for a treatment, there's no way to test whether it's effective or not. So that's the enormous advance that we'll get if we can develop a biomarker for this disease.
In Boston, Ann Mostu, Bloomberg News.
Wine is a $300 billion global industry where one person's opinion can make fortunes or break them. That's because of this man, Robert Parker, and his newsletter, The Wine Advocate. For 3 decades, he dominated as the world's most influential wine critic. Now Parker's protege is building an empire of his own. Antonio Galloni runs Venice.
Antonio, tell me, what are you trying to build at Venice?
Well, at Venice, we started with the idea in 2013 of building a world-class platform. We have a database of about 250,000 professionally written reviews. On Delectable, we have 7 million user reviews. Through Delectable, we also have a partnership with Whole Foods and several other partnerships that we can't announce just yet. And when you put that all together, what we have is something that no other company in our space can even come close to.
Do you think of yourself as the next Parker?
Not at all.
Why?
Because Steve Jobs said you can't live your life trying to be somebody else. So he's one of my biggest influences, and I've never wanted to be a replica of somebody else because a replica is never as good as the original. Bob is a genius, fantastic, one of a kind. We're going to be something completely different, and I have no desire to be some version of somebody else.
Different in what way?
Every decision that I've made at this company is completely anathemic to what Bob did with his company. I want our writers to be partners. All of my senior people are locked into the company. They all have equity or they have a path to equity based on business results. That's something that we never had at Parker. Our benefits are world-class, and everything that we've done at Venice is completely different from that model. When Steve Tanzer, who is the most experienced active wine critic in America, wants to work with us, that says something. When Alessandro Masnaghetti, who's the best cartographer of vineyards, wants to work with us, that says something. When Neil Martin, who's a superstar wine critic with enormous experience in Bordeaux and Burgundy and the former lead critic at The Advocate, wants to come and be part of our team, that says something.
You make it sound like The Wine Advocate was a disaster as a company and a miserable experience as an employee.
No, it was great because I got to work with Bob Parker when he was at his prime. You know, and Bob was like a second father to me, and we talked on the phone all the time, and he gave me great advice.
Can anyone's palate dominate the wine criticism business the way Parker's did? And should anyone's palate dominate it the way his did?
I just think the world is very different today. You know, I mean, it's just a totally different world. It's probably not healthy to have a single person dominating the world.
It's not even wine criticism, it's the wine industry.
Yeah, that's probably not the healthiest thing in the world. But I think that there's just such an opportunity right now with social media and technology to reach such a massive number of people that I think it's possible that 1 or 2 people will actually have more influence than Bob Parker did, because they will, again, this goes back to your first question, not trying to be a version of somebody else. You see this in sports all the time. It's like, oh, well, nobody will ever beat this record. And then somebody comes along, you know, it's like tennis, Pete Sampras. Nobody's ever going to win as many Grand Slams. Now you have 2 guys who are ahead of that and 1 knocking on the door. And so I think a lot like that.
You're a former investment banker. How does that inform and influence what you're doing and what you've done?
My generation has had to deal with a lot more challenges. That's why I think we're actually much better poised for the future. My first job in finance, the first thing that happened was long-term capital, 1998. Then the tech bubble melted down. Then there was a mutual fund trading scandal. You know, that was all like within about 5 or 6 years. And these are the things that I had to deal with as a young executive. My peers who were 20 years older didn't know how to manage in crisis. They'd only seen Black Monday. They'd just been in a big bull market. It's very different. So I'm very lucky. People of my generation or a little bit younger have actually had to deal with a lot more crises. I think that's actually good for learning how to cope with challenges in business.
From the outside, it kind of looks like you're trying to demolish the house that Parker built, right? You left The Wine Advocate.
Yeah.
You merged with one of his chief rivals.
Yeah.
And you just hired his successor, Neil Martin.
Mm-hmm.
So are you?
I think what that says is that all the best people want to work at our company. And that's really what we strive to create starting in 2013. We wanted to create a world-class company that would attract the best-in-class talent, and not just on the content side, on the technology side, on the digital side, our office, and at every level, what we're trying to, we only hire superstars, and we're looking for those superstars. In the world of professional wrestling, there's something called a swerve.
Hulk Hogan has betrayed WCW!
Some examples. These tag team partners are called babyfaces, or the good guys. Then one of them swerves when he super kicks his tag team partner in the head, quickly assuming the role of the bad guy, or what the wrestling world calls the heel.
Are you kidding? What a despicable act that was!
Or a match is almost lost when, what's that? The superstar wrestler appears out of nowhere sprinting down the aisle to save the match.
That's the Warriors music! That's the Ultimate Warrior!
That's a swerve. So it should go as no surprise that World Wrestling Entertainment, known as the WWE, the most popular brand of sports entertainment in the world, is prepared for any swerves that come their way. So here's the story of how the WWE learned to see the swerve coming. So I spoke to Bloomberg reporters Felix Gillette.
I'm a writer for Bloomberg News for the global business team.
And Kim Basine.
And I'm the U.S. luxury reporter at Bloomberg.
To find out exactly how the WWE is positioning itself for an all-out global invasion, which starts with a massive change to their lucrative pay-per-view model.
WWE basically pioneered the pay-per-view model on cable. I remember as a kid, when the pay-per-view events came up, all of our friends would scramble around and try and get one of the parents to pay for it.
But in 2014, they took a huge risk.
They saw a little bit sooner than some of the other entertainment brands that where this whole thing was moving was away from cable and satellite television and towards on-demand streaming video apps. They made this risky decision, in essence, cannibalizing that pay-per-view model, which they had essentially built.
And after some early turbulence, it's working. Roughly 1.5 million people are paying $9.99 a month for the WWE app, making it the 5th most popular streaming OTT service. This adapt-or-die approach is in the WWE's DNA. Over the past 30 years, the company always seems to think 2 steps ahead. In the early 90s,
WWE was at its most threatened when Ted Turner took them on with WCW,
which stands for World Championship Wrestling. And back then, the WCW was winning the ratings war. So in order to compete with them,
WWE had changed its product from a family-friendly kind of cartoonish style to this really raw. That's why they called their show Raw. It was this raw style of wrestling.
With violent, outrageous, reality-inspired plot lines and aggressive personas.
From a 16-foot ladder!
And they won that fight against Ted Turner. And they bought WCW.
The early 2000s ushered in an era of testosterone-driven programming aimed at the red-blooded American male.
Bra and panties matches, and people smash each other over their head with like barbed wire bats and things like that.
Until 2015, when WWE fans started a hashtag Give Divas a Chance. Since then, WWE has hired 40 more female wrestlers, and that growing cast of female characters was part of a much larger plan.
They started to try to appeal to a broader set of people.
Let's attract more female fans. And after we've attracted more female fans, let's attract more international fans. They're broadening their base, and they're doing that in large part to make it more advertising friendly.
And not just friendly to advertisers.
They're trying to build up their fan base in China. They're trying to build up their fan base in Europe. They, already have a pretty good fan base in India.
India is a place where they already have an established wrestling culture.
Because of the gigantic Indian wrestler, the Great Khali. But there's still a lot of work to do. While the WWE set a revenue record in 2017, only 30% of it is coming from an overseas audience. And there's one person whose responsibility is to grow that number.
The buck eventually stops at Vince McMahon, no matter what's happening within WWE.
Yeah, he's a very controlling guy, and it's a very, very, very tightly scripted company.
And that goes all the way down the board to big stars' entrance music. And their outfits and things like that.
So with a CEO like McMahon always planning 2 moves ahead and an aggressive push into multiple international markets, a big issue is money.
It's hard to do all those things simultaneously without committing a huge amount of capital to it.
And that's where the WWE becomes an attractive company for buyers.
Potentially, one thing that could happen with WWE is they could benefit by being acquired by a bigger technology or telecom company, an Amazon or Facebook or or a 21st Century Fox.
So with a market cap of $2.8 billion, the advantage of owning 100% of their own content, and a rapid consolidation spreading throughout the entertainment industry, it looks like the WWE is well positioned, even if there are swerves ahead.
Our world is changing. Every day, it changes a little faster. Some changes are too small to see. Others, too big to handle. Sometimes, change feels slow. So slow, we don't even notice. Other times, it happens all at once, and we can't keep up. For our climate, change means many things. And between too small to see and too big to handle, there is a whole world of difference. The clock is ticking. This is Bloomberg Green.
Saving the seas. This week, the deep-sea diver who stopped writing the ocean's obituary to find a solution. Enric Sala tells us why the next 10 years matter most. And globalization needs to get greener. Shipping accounts for nearly an eighth of all transport emissions. How can the industry clean up its act? Plus, protecting coastlines comes at a huge environmental cost. But one Israeli startup found a way to keep the sea out and the animals in. From London, I'm Anne-Marie Hordern, and this is Bloomberg Green. After more than a decade of studying the ocean as an academic, Enric Sala realized he was writing the ocean's obituary. He quit his job and became a full-time conservationist. As an in-house explorer for National Geographic, he's clocked more than 5,000 open water dives. He's also founded Pristine Seas, a project that combines exploration, research, and media to lobby countries to protect their oceans. To date, it has helped create marine reserves equivalent to half the size of Canada. I spoke to him about his mission and why it's so urgent.
The state of the world's oceans is really bad. We have lost 90% of the large fish in the ocean. Sharks, groupers, cod, tuna. More than half of the fish stocks are overfished, which means that we are taking them out of the water faster than they can reproduce. More than half of the ocean is affected by industrial fishing, and global warming is killing coral reefs all around the world. The ocean is in a trajectory of decline.
Can you just visualize for our viewers who never get to see the kind of things you are able to see, what an ocean and healthy ecosystem looks like versus one that's next to a bustling economic and industrialized area?
Coral reefs in the United States, in the Florida Keys, are down to only 2% of what they used to be. Before, 80 to 90% of the bottom on a coral reef in the Caribbean was covered by live coral. Now, Florida Keys have only 2%. The average in the Caribbean is about 5% of the bottom covered by live coral. The rest is covered by slime and seaweed. And most of the fish you can see are this big. And it is very, very rare that if you jump into any place in the Caribbean at random, you see a shark. It's very, very rare. Now, let's go to Millennium Atoll, for example. An atoll that is uninhabited and fished south of the equator in the Central Pacific, belongs to the Republic of Kiribati. 2009, we conducted the first underwater expedition to this island, and I still remember the first time. Jumped over the side of the boat, and as soon as the bubbles cleared, I was surrounded by 15 gray reef sharks. After a couple minutes, the sharks decided that we were boring, and they went back to do their thing. And you look down, 90% of the seafloor is covered by thriving coral, and it's full of fish, and a sea turtle comes by. Now, this abundance that we rarely see anywhere except in well-managed marine reserves. This is what the ocean used to be like, and this is what we have learned from going to these pristine places.
And you write in your book that you're writing the obituary of ocean life. What's the cure?
The cure is doing less harm. Basically, there are three things that we are doing to the ocean. One is we are taking fish out of the water faster than they can reproduce. Two, we are turning the ocean warmer and more acidic because of man-made climate change. And three, we are throwing in everything that we don't want, our waste and our plastic. We need basically to reverse these trends.
Does this mean that a lot of this falls to governments and their policies?
That's a big part of it, because it is governments that regulate fishing and mineral extraction and oil extraction. It is governments that have the legal authority to create large marine reserves in the ocean. But also, local communities have an important role to play because some of the most successful protected areas in the ocean are community-led and community-managed marine reserves. So when the fish come back, the divers come in. And that creates huge economic opportunities through ecotourism. These areas that are managed by communities are very successful because the communities have a vested interest in having as many fish as possible inside them so they can enjoy the benefits.
What from the pandemic has changed your view when it comes to protection of the environment?
Nature has given us a very strong signal of how fast it can recover if we just give it space. Everybody was fascinated by all these videos of the whales and the dolphins coming into marinas and mountain lions on the streets of Santiago in Chile, wild goats in the UK. Nature has this extraordinary ability to bounce back if we just give it space. This is why we need to protect at least 30% of the planet by 2030.
How do healthy marine ecosystems help in the fight against climate change, though?
Most people see the ocean as a victim of climate change. But the ocean can also be a solution because we know that the more life there is in the ocean, like big fish and big whales, the more these organisms help to make the ocean productive and absorb more CO2. The kelp forest, seagrass beds, all of these are important ecosystems in the ocean that are similar to the forests on the land that capture a lot of our carbon pollutions.
What are you most excited about in your field?
We have 10 years to fix this problem. Global fisheries catch is going down, stocks are collapsing. Business as usual means that by 2050, 90% of the coral reefs are gone, that most commercial fisheries have collapsed. That affects food security, that affects migration of people. We have 10 years to get to peak greenhouse gas emissions and then go carbon neutral by 2050. And we have 10 years to protect at least 30% of the ocean so we can restore much of this health and productivity, not just for saving biodiversity, but also saving our life support system. We are not talking about something that is apart from us. We are not apart from nature. We are a part of nature. So these 10 years are probably the most critical in the history of humanity.
The most accurate measurements of changing oceans will come from space. While Enric Sala explores what lies beneath, a new satellite is giving us data from above.
We'll learn more about our oceans and climate change, but from space. A new satellite's been launched from California. Its mission, track the accelerating rise of sea levels.
Well, the main instruments on board include a dual-frequency radar altimeter. And this is the primary instrument of the mission, and that's the one that's measuring sea surface height, significant wave height, and wind speed over the ocean. And from those measurements, we can actually have the superb measurements that we expect of sea level rise.
Data gathered from Sentinel-6 will be used alongside information from other satellites to build as complete a picture of the oceans as possible.
With a long record, we can precisely measure the acceleration. We eventually can detect new regime, tipping points. For example, if there is a runaway in the melting of Greenland or Antarctica, sea level will record this runaway change because it is an integrator of all changes that are occurring in the climate system. So we will be able to see some change, big change in the global climate.
The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration expects that sea level rise will increasingly threaten U.S. coastlines. One example, the southern tip of Manhattan is expected to flood 20 to 40 times a year by 2030.
11 of the 15 largest megacities are located at the coast, and this number will double. The number of people living in coastal area will double by 2060. So, knowing how much sea level is rising at the coast and how much it will rise in the future in coastal areas is as obvious. It's obviously a major goal for human beings.
Coming up, from sails to steam to oil, the shipping industry is no stranger to change. But how will it navigate the next transition? This is Bloomberg Green. From Bloomberg's European headquarters in London, I'm Anne-Marie Hordern. This is Bloomberg Green. Now, for your roundup of this week's latest climate news, Jennifer Zabazaja has your Green in Brief.
Here's the climate news you need to know. Deforestation of the world's largest rainforest has hit a 12-year high. More than 4,000 square miles of the Amazon rainforest was destroyed in 2020. That's a 9.5% increase from a year earlier. Government data shows that destruction has soared since President Jair Bolsonaro took office and weakened environmental enforcement. The Amazon is home to millions of species and plants and is critical in the fight against climate change. Bitcoin is hitting all-time highs, but at what cost to the environment? The cryptocurrency is energy intensive, and there are concerns if it becomes mainstream. According to MIT, back in 2018, Bitcoin's carbon footprint was almost as big as Portugal's. Want to get better at tackling climate change? We'll hire more women. That's according to Bloomberg New Energy Finance. Firms with 30% or more women in top jobs tend to perform better when it comes to the environment and are more likely to set clear climate goals. Shopping online is more popular than ever now, but the price of convenience is measured in CO2, and more deliveries means more fuel burned and more packaging wasted. So what can companies do? Well, many are becoming more efficient and sourcing more clean energy for their data centers and warehouses. And England's farmers will be paid to go green after Brexit. As European subsidies are phased out, they'll get new money to encourage them to produce healthy, sustainable food. Poor farming practices are one of the leading drivers of water pollution and the loss of biodiversity. I'm Jennifer Zabasaja in New York. Anne-Marie, back to you.
The shipping industry is more than just the grease on the wheels of globalization. It's its chief enabler. 11 billion tons of goods are transported by ship each year, the biggest contributors being 2 billion tons of oil, 1 billion tons of iron ore, and 350 million tons of grain. According to the International Chamber of Shipping, 80% of Europe's imports and exports happen over the seas. And for such a vast industry, it also contributes its fair share of emissions. Shipping makes up 12% of global transport energy consumption. So how does it clean up its act? Earlier, I caught up with Bloomberg Green reporter Laura Milan about just how big of a challenge this is going to be for the industry.
One of the main issues is size. So about 90% of the world's cargo is moved by ships. So obviously changing such a huge industry is not going to be fast, and it's not going to be easy. The second issue has to do with technology. So ships obviously travel for many days at sea. It's not as easy for them to refuel as it would be for a car, for example, going on a road. And the sector still hasn't found a technology that's economically viable and that's zero emissions, and equivalent to the electric batteries for cars, for example.
But actions are being put in place to make the industry a bit more environmentally friendly. Walk us through those steps that they're taking.
That's it. So there's a first step that would involve using low emission fuels or biofuels that would significantly reduce the existing emissions. And then at a regulatory level, when it comes to the policy and the governments, there are steps being made as well. I would say that the most significant ones come from the European Union, which started to track emissions a few years ago and is now looking to include shipping emissions in the emissions trading system. So that would significantly reduce and help calculate the emissions from the shipping industry. Now, China is taking similar steps. So at the moment, regions need to report shipping emissions to the central government. And finally, we have the International Maritime Organization with a pledge to reduce shipping emissions by 50% in 2050. Now, we must say that that pledge has been considered insufficient by environmental groups, but at least some steps are being taken.
So to get to 2050, the industry obviously is going to need to start tapping some new technologies. What new technologies are you seeing being introduced into the shipping industry?
So we have seen pilot technologies being developed for years now, but what's interesting about this current moment is that we're seeing big players invest in these technologies that are not yet economically viable, but that one day might be. So for example, we are seeing earlier this year, the world's largest agricultural commodities trader, Cargill, saying they will invest in attaching sails to their ships so they can make any technology that they run their ships on more efficient. Similarly, we have seen a spin-off of Airbus, the aeronautics company, developing a similar application with kites. We have been following also developments in hydrogen. So at the moment, hydrogen fuel seems like a good option, a possible option when it has been developed and when it becomes economically viable. And we have Vestas, for example, the world's largest turbine maker, developing some ships that will be able to run on hydrogen in the near future.
Coming up, rising sea levels means humans need to get creative when it comes to coastal defenses. But how do we protect both ourselves and the environment? One Israeli startup may have the answer. That's coming up next. This is Bloomberg Green. In London, I'm Anne-Marie Hordern. This is Bloomberg Green. After water, what's the resource that humans use the most? It's concrete, 3 tons a year for every person on the planet. And engineers estimate it's used twice as much as all other building materials combined. And it comes with a huge environmental cost. Concrete, not just in cities, it's a common feature on our coastlines too. And that's taking a toll on biodiversity. But one Israeli startup has found a way of making sea defenses stronger and encouraging life to thrive.
If you take a look at concrete structures like breakwaters or seawalls, the water around them is often clear. That's not actually a good thing, because it means there's no life. Marine species are actually most abundant in coastal areas, but it's also where us humans prefer to live too. So when we build here, we drive away marine life.
The concrete in the marine world has a lot of additives, a lot of chemicals, and some of those materials are actually leaching out, and they're actually prohibiting marine life to thrive. If we keep developing without any regards to natural communities, there is a tilting point from which beyond we cannot really go back.
In the coastal city of Tel Aviv, an Israeli startup wants to revolutionize our urban coastlines. Their sea defenses are transforming lifeless man-made structures into teeming ecosystems. They do this by replacing standard concrete with their own special cement formulas.
As opposed to regular cement-based concrete, e-concrete includes certain elements that enhance the growth of marine flora and fauna of plants and animals. Our admix, which is kind of our secret sauce, is basically kind of sealing the concrete, making it less aggressive for the marine environment. That once we add it, we enable life to flourish.
In the lab, the team run tests to identify what mixes will work best for marine life.
So we take really ice cube-sized concrete slabs of different compositions, and we put larvae, 20, 30, 50. We need to have a lot of replicates. We're geeky scientists, so we have to have a lot of replication and controls. And then within a few days or just a few weeks, we can get an answer on their preference. So obviously, if they die, they have a very low tolerance to that specific concrete mix design. And if they thrive or they flourish, we can quantify that very quickly.
E-concrete says it typically sees double the biodiversity of regular grey concrete. From fish and sea caterpillars on their armour blocks to crabs on these tidal pools that sit on the shoreline.
This unit holds water during the low tide, so it's always moist, and therefore it has a very comfortable habitat for crabs and sea anemones and sea stars, etc. These pools have been here for less than 3 months, and this is already what you can see. It's covered with life. See the rock around it, which has been here for probably 10, 20, maybe even more years, only has a thin layer of green algae, and that's it.
As well as the composition of the cement mix, E-concrete designs its products specifically to the marine environment it will be deployed, to create niches for endangered species, or to develop nurseries like these oyster beds. The final part of the equation is creating complex surface textures to mimic natural rock or coral, an environment that helps anchor young organisms.
When concrete elements are being cast, the typical goal is to have a very slick surface, very, very smooth. The idea is to get the water to flow right across it. When we're designing e-concrete with a rough surface, we want to do the complete opposite. We want to slow the water when they are crossing the structure so that the larvae can actually adhere and attach to the surface.
E-concrete has to offer its clients more than just ecological credentials. Over time, they've discovered that creating hospitable habitats for marine life adds another advantage, one that is surely hard to ignore.
We've seen evidence to the fact that the growth of the organisms on the concrete create kind of a layer of defense. Just the addition of weight, we can actually gain stability and strength over time.
This is let's say the unit when we put it in the water. And this is after a year in the water. And what you can see here is all the oysters are completely covering it. We designed the units so they can withstand the forces and perform in terms of structural performance, but they can also be a backbone for ecological enhancement.
The company tests its miniature designs in tanks full of real seawater, rocks, plants, and animal life from around the world.
What we're looking for is the accumulation of calcium carbonate on the surface of the concrete of different mixes and different designs. This is the process that we call it biogenic buildup. So with time, we get a buildup of calcium carbonate that is sourced from marine organisms on the surface of the concrete. And we actually encapsulate the concrete with a natural rock. So when the organism die, in the case of a coral, it will die, and then another coral will sit on it, and that's how a reef is growing.
The hope that our man-made structures could become stronger over time also means better economics. The units require less maintenance and could therefore stay in the water for longer. E-concrete, though, is just a few years old, so it needs more time to really quantify the longevity of its products. But the company are certain their products are better for the environment, and not just in terms of improving biodiversity.
We're kind of trying to offset some of that immense carbon footprint of the concrete industry.
Construction is responsible for about 11% of global carbon emissions. By adding a biological crust to their products, e-concrete prevents some CO2 from being released into the atmosphere.
For every kilogram of calcium carbonate being created by those marine organisms, we're offsetting 120 grams of CO2. So think about building a port infrastructure or a city waterfront that is an active carbon sink. I think that's a great advantage of the technology.
That does it for this week, but let's keep the conversation going on Twitter. Follow us at Climate. I'm Anne-Marie Hordern, and this is Bloomberg Green.
Headlines and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
It is 2 p.m. on Wall Street, and we have a mixed picture for the equity market from Bloomberg World Headquarters in New York. I'm Doug Prisner. President Biden has selected Jay Powell for a second term as Fed chair.
I believe having Fed leadership with a broad bipartisan support is important, especially now in such a politically divided nation. I believe we need to do everything we can to take the bitter partisanship of today's politics out of something as important as the independence and credibility of the Federal Reserve. This is vital to maintaining public trust in an independent institution like the Federal Reserve. And that is why I'm so proud as well to nominate Dr. Lael Brainerd, to serve as Vice Chair of the Federal Reserve.
Now, today's announcement removes the level of uncertainty. It also emphasizes continuity. Now the conversation can focus on the question of how aggressive the Fed should be in combating higher inflation. Powell may be viewed as slightly more hawkish than Brainerd. We'll get more insights into the Fed's thinking on Wednesday with the release of the minutes from the last policy meeting. At the moment, though, markets seem to be pricing in a full 25 basis point hike by the June meeting and a second increase for next November. A 2-year Treasury at 58 basis points right now and a 10-year at 161. We have a mixed picture for the equity market. The S&P 500 right now extending a record. Energy shares leading its advance with the S&P Energy Group up 2%. OPEC Plus may reconsider its plan to add support. 1%, but the NASDAQ composite on that spike in rates is down 0.5%, and the dollar rallying at this hour. I'm Doug Prisner. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash.
This is Bloomberg Business Week. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine, plus global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Bloomberg Quick Takes Tim Stenovic on Bloomberg Radio.
And a very good afternoon, everyone. It is Monday, November 22nd, 2021. Carol Masser, my co-host Tim Stenovic. He's off this week, but joining me is none other than Ed Ludlow, joining us from our London bureau. And I was going to say, Ed, we're counting down to a new Fed chief, but we got one.
We got one, and we got some really telling words, I thought, from those opening speeches. There's so much to unpack, not just for policy, but for their read on the economy right now.
Yeah, and actually not a new Fed, right? It's just Jay Powell getting a second term. So we're going to get all over that. We did see some reaction in the Treasury market. We're going to talk about that. We're also going to talk about why, for Powell, this may be a Paul Volcker moment in reverse. This is a really interesting story in the current issue, Ed, of Bloomberg Business Week magazine.
Yeah, Joe Weisenthal, the smart thoughts as always. But it's not just inflation that's the problem, right? We need to think about full employment. There's so many people sitting on the sidelines of the U.S. economy. What will it take to bring them back in?
So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about a possible Monster combination between Monster Beverage and Constellation Brands. We're also going to talk about an aging society. We've got a really cool guest who joined me at Milken back in October, and it wouldn't be Thanksgiving without cranberries, so we're going to check in with the CEO, Tom Hayes, of Ocean Spray. He's coming up in just a moment. Let's get to the Market Drivers Report. And let's set the Business Week agenda. On this Monday, we're live in our Interactive Broker studio, streaming on YouTube. You can see us right now. Dave Wilson with us, stocks editor at Bloomberg News in our Interactive Broker studio, along with Kriti Gupta, Bloomberg Markets correspondent here at Bloomberg News. Dave, let's kick it off with you. The Fed news, I was kind of glad we got it out on this Monday because I thought we were going to spread it out throughout the week as we counted down to Thanksgiving. What about market reaction?
Well, when you look at how things are shaking out, I mean, one thing that jumps out is the industry groups that have been winners this year. Well, they're winners today, and you'd expect that with the financial shares. I mean, given that we're seeing bond yields rising, and of course, that means treasuries are falling and other bonds. Thing is, though, that means also that the banks may actually be able to make some more money down the line, whether you're talking about loans or investments. So, it's a plus there. Energy stocks, the best performers among the 11 main industry groups in the S&P 500. And it's interesting to see stocks move higher on a day when, tech companies just really aren't in the mix. The S&P 500 Technology Index, a little change in communication services, where you find Google's owner, Alphabet, as well as Facebook, is actually the one group out of the 11 that's down today. So, a bit of a twist, I mean, in light of the decision on the Fed chair.
Yeah, I mean, Dave, I think to your point, there's a really big thing about the financials right now, up 2% on the day. And you said it was, I'm just looking at the chart here. It is the biggest one-day increase going all the way back to about mid-September. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but just got to throw that little fact out there.
Yeah.
No, I want you to interrupt. You have all the key data. I mean, it's weird. It's like continuity seems to be key, right? This is the duo that we thought we'd get. It just took a bit longer than we thought it would take. Is this a strange market reaction? Especially in equity markets, we saw this kind of all-in risk-on, or I guess it's a relief rally, you might call it, Dave Wilson. But then we kind of lost a bit of steam as people think again.
Well, what's interesting there, you would think continuity would be appreciated, steady as she goes when it comes to monetary policy. But after all, going into this, people weren't sure they were going to get it. I mean, there was this undercurrent that Lael Brainerd, who was ultimately named vice chairman, who ended up being chairman, and, that policy might sort of downshift a little bit when it comes to things like raising interest rates or cutting back on bond buying. So, what you're seeing today is sort of a shakeout, arguably, as people initially sort of appreciate the idea that it's going to be the same going forward, and then they say, wait a minute, it's going to be the same going forward. It's not going to be easier for us. So that's sort of the best explanation I can come up with for what's going on here.
I got to say, Kriti and Dave, like from so many of the different guests, it was Paul Krugman said it so well to David Weston, Nobel laureate, of course, Paul Krugman, but saying that there's air between the two of them in terms of monetary policy. If you talk about regulatory fronts, it's a whole different thing. But we're not going to see, we wouldn't have seen probably too much change when it comes to monetary policy, whether it had been Jay or whether it had been Leo Brainerd.
Exactly. And I mean, one thing to keep in mind also is not only are they very similar, but they're about to be dealing with the other parts of Biden's announcement, which is coming, I believe, tomorrow. And that is the SPR release. And such a crucial piece when you're talking about inflation and the rate liftoff is what's going on in the energy market.
Mm-hmm.
And you're going to start hearing, I mean, I believe we had a headline today from our oil team that at the end of the day, you do have OPEC willing to adjust their own production in response to China, Japan, India, and the United States releasing their own reserve relief. So you do have this kind of geopolitical reserve release production kind of war to say. And that's going to factor into rates because at the end of the day, what is driving inflation is those energy prices.
We've been so fixated on this announcement after that hot print from CPI earlier in the month. It's interesting being here in Europe because inflation is a global issue, right? Germany is seeing the highest inflation in 3 decades. Dave Wilson, there's other stuff out there in the market, right? A lot of calls around equities, concerns about, lockdowns in Europe, whether that spills over into the States. What else is kind of driving the psychology of markets on Monday?
At the same time that you bring up those points, Ed, I'm looking here at the casinos being among the best performers on the day in the S&P 500. Las Vegas Sands, Wynn Resorts sort of jumping out at me. And the flip side of that, the biggest gain in the S&P 500 belongs to Moderna. So, you have U.S. regulators clearing a way for any adult to get booster shots. And so how that kind of plays off with the situation that we're seeing in Europe, I mean, it's kind of a study in contrast at this point.
That's a conflicted market in my view. All right, we got to run. Kriti Gupta, thank you so much. Bloomberg Markets correspondent. Dave Wilson will be back with his chart and stock of the day. Let's get to the Bloomberg Business Week Bite of the Day. Ed, it's one number that tells us a lot, brought to you by GEP. GEP helps businesses transform supply chains with strategy, managed services, and AI-based cloud-native software. Learn more at GEP.com. And today's number, Ed, it's 44.
Big number.
It is. Well, here's why. More American adults don't expect to have a child. This is according to a Pew survey. It found 44% of non-parents aged 18 to 49 say it's not too likely or not at all likely that they will have children someday, an increase of 7 percentage points from the 37% who said the same back in 2018. Reasons cited include medical, financial age, or lacking a partner, which to me just reminds us we got to think about the future labor force if people aren't having kids. All right, let's get to world and national news. For that, it's over to Nancy Lyons. She's in D.C. Hey, Nance.
Hey, Carol. President Biden is sticking with the current Fed Chair Jay Powell, saying continuity is important for our financial systems right now.
At this moment, both enormous potential and enormous uncertainty for our economy, we need stability and independence at the Federal Reserve.
Biden says Powell has proven he can manage the Fed without political interference. Powell, who is a Republican, will likely win a smooth confirmation in the Senate, although progressive Democrats may be disappointed by the choice. Lawyers are making their closing arguments to jurors in the Ahmaud Arbery case in Georgia. Prosecutor Linda Dunikoski says the 3 defendants made an assumption that Arbery committed a crime the day when they wanted to stop and talk with him.
Made assumptions about what was going on that day, and they made their decision to attack Ahmaud Arbery in their driveways.
Dunikoski says it is clear the 3 men, Gregory McMichael, his son Travis, and William Roddy Bryan Jr., decided to pursue Arbery because he was a black man running down their street. Defense attorneys say the men suspected that Arbery had burglarized a house under construction and were trying to make a citizen's arrest. Officials in Waukesha, Wisconsin say last night's incident in which an SUV rammed into a Christmas parade was not a terrorist incident. The suspect, Darrell Brooks, has, however, been charged with 5 counts of intentional homicide. 40 people were injured, including as many as 6 children. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Nancy Lyons.
All right, Nance, thank you so much. You are listening to Bloomberg Business Week on this Monday. Carol Master along with Ed Ludlow of Bloomberg News. And Of course, front and center, Ed, no doubt about it, is the president coming out and renominating Jay Powell for a second term as head of the Federal Reserve. Senator Elizabeth Warren, though, coming out, or Laura Davidson reporting, that said she would have voted against Jay Powell's reappointment to chair the Fed, but that she'll support, or she'll vote against it when the vote comes down, but that she'll support Lael Brainerd, whom President Biden, of course, nominated for the bank's number 2 spot.
Yeah, the president in his speech was kind of really playing up this idea of continuity, a pair of hands who navigated the shock of the pandemic so ably. And all of the dissenting voices in the Democratic Party are so fixated on Powell's track record on climate change and on regulatory scrutiny of banks, things of that nature, rather than the outlook for monetary policy, which I thought was a really interesting point to basically jump on so quickly.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting, too. And I think, the concern is Elizabeth Warren, of course, always looking for heightened oversight of the financial system. And, on one side, many would argue, coming off the financial crisis, it's a reminder that we need to be vigilant. At the same time, Lael Brainerd, and I thought this is one of the things that was interesting in some of the conversations surrounding the second term for Jay Powell, is saying that in terms of monetary policy, Jay Powell and Lael Brainerd seen by many to have very similar views when it comes to monetary policy. When it comes to the regulatory front, that's a different bag. And then you do wonder whether or not she will bring a stronger voice when it comes to oversight of our financial sector. And maybe as a result, Elizabeth Warren will get some of what she maybe hopes for.
And that's what we've got to talk about next with Bloomberg's chief U.S. economist, Anna Wong, that this idea that that's where Brainerd will be active, the non-monetary policy side of things, which is kind of hard to get your head around after an announcement like that.
Yeah, but very key, because we know the Fed is certainly crucial when it comes to so many different aspects of not only monetary policy and what goes on in the economy, but of course what goes on in our financial system. You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Carol Massar, Ed Ludlow, and this is Bloomberg.
updates, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
We have a move up in the entire U.S. yield curve today, and the equity market trading mixed. Earlier, President Biden selected Jay Powell for a second term as Fed chair. The president also elevated Fed Governor Lael Brainerd to the role of vice chair. This really removes a level of uncertainty and at the same time emphasizes a lot of continuity. We're going to get a little bit more insight into the Fed's thinking Wednesday with the release of those Fed minutes from the last policy meeting. At this moment in time, the market seemed to be pricing in a full quarter-point rate hike at the June meeting next June. Second increase would be November of next year. We've got a 2-year Treasury right now up more than 7 basis points to 58 basis points, a 10-year at 162. Now, with that move up in rates, it's not going to be a big surprise to see the bank stocks trading higher. The KBW Bank Index right now is up by more than 2.6%. But the spike in rates has weakened information tech and communication services shares. As a result, the NASDAQ composite down about 0.4%. Technically, the S&P is at a record level. An advance here today led by energy stocks. The S&P Energy Group responding to a move up in crude oil with a gain right now of about 2%. Dow Industrial Average ahead about 0.6%. I'm Doug Krisner. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Dougie, thank you so much. Well, it has certainly been top of mind for weeks, really months. Would Jay Powell get a second term as head of the U.S. Fed? Well, no more guessing or wondering. We know President Biden preserving continuity at the Fed by selecting Jay Powell for that second term as chair and elevating Lael Brainerd to vice chair as the U.S. Central Bank grapples with the fastest inflation in 3 decades and really lingering effects of COVID-19. What's going on in Europe, a reminder that we are far from being out of this pandemic. Let's get to it with Bloomberg News International Economics and Policy Correspondent Michael McKee with us in our Interactive Brokers studio here in New York. Bloomberg Economics Chief U.S. Economist Anna Wong on the phone from the nation's capital. Mike, let's kick it off with you. I can't say I'm not surprised. What is the important takeaway of the news from the president today, and now who is at the Fed?
I think you take away a couple of things. One is that the president has gone back to the old way of nominating Fed chairs, keeping somebody in office who's considered to have done a good job, not just by politicians, but by Wall Street, even if they're a member of the other party. Back to the non-politicization of the Fed. Another thing that you can say is a bit of a surprise was Lael Brainerd not getting the supervisory job, but that leaves open that position for the president to perhaps appoint someone even stricter on regulation, make the Elizabeth Warren wing of the Democratic Party happy with that nomination. We should get that in a couple of weeks. Overall, it means continuity. It means that Wall Street knows what the policy will be going into next year. It's not a question of what will be done. It's a question of when it will be done, and that'll depend on the data. And so they can start making some pricing plans as they go forward.
Bloomberg Chief U.S. Economist Anna Wong, you wrote a really fabulous piece over the weekend about how a Brainerd Fed would differ from a Powell Fed. In the end, it's academic, right, because she's the vice chair. But it was interesting, she opened her remarks on stage with the words, bringing inflation down.
And I was going to say,
what role will she play?
And is it not academic because she's got a really key role now at the Fed?
Yeah, well, a trick question. But I mean, what's your read on her policy going forward?
Right. So in my piece, I did talk about how even though Brainerd seems to be more selfish, but she's at the core of who she is a very data-dependent and practical policy maker. Her experience in the past 10 years in D.C. had been reacting to these fire drills, these financial crises. First with the European sovereign debt crisis, and then the China slowdown in 2015, and a taper tantrum. And so I think what she is that she's going to look at the data, and if the data is showing that, and she actually laid out 3 very clear metrics of when she will get worried about inflation. One, it is if the rental part, if she sees higher rents, that's happening. 2, if she sees that inflation is unanchoring, such as if there's this sign of wage price spiral, then she would be alarmed, and we don't see evidence of that happening yet. And we're planning to write a deeper piece about how the Fed thinks about wage price spiral. And and just the third if there's more COVID shutdowns going forward. So anyway, yeah, we think that she will be data independent, data dependent.
Well, I have to say, and I'm going to jump in because Mike, it sounds like, wait, I've heard that data dependent phrase a lot. It sounds like in terms of the kinds of conversations that we're going to have at the Fed are no different from what we were having before.
Yeah, and that was kind of the point of the nomination today, that we know what we're getting with Jay Powell, we know what we're getting with Lael Brainerd, and we should add that the vice chair almost never votes against the chair, so you can expect them to be, not only because they think alike, but because of the positions, they'll be in lockstep going forward in terms of what to do. But as Anna says, it's a question of what happens with the pandemic, whether or not the inflation numbers that we get start to roll over, and there's some evidence that some of them are, but we're still a long way from knowing. And then it's a question of, do they, at the December 15th meeting, decide to taper more quickly, giving them the optionality of being able to tighten sooner?
I got to say, the thing that jumped out to me, and I'm going to put this to both Mike and Anna. Anna, maybe to you first, is that I felt like the idea of an independent Fed was woven through everything. And if we saw anybody be independent, we saw Jay Powell, who was appointed by President Trump, but nonetheless stand up to him during his tenure. There is something to be said by that, and the political win with that, Anna.
Yes, for sure. I think this is definitely a win for Biden, at least in the eyes of economic history books, for safeguarding the institutional independence of the Fed.
And Mike,
but you know, sorry.
No, go ahead,
Mike.
please. Okay.
You know, one point that Mike mentioned about you know, the surprise of Leo being appointed as vice chair, I think that there's also something there, because the vice chair post, for example, as Rich Clarida, how he made of this post, he was basically the architect, the intellectual architect behind this new average inflation targeting framework.
Right.
And the next policy framework review could be as early as end of 2023.
Right.
And perhaps Brainerd, who probably is the one who chose to, who prefer this vice chair post rather than the supervision post, maybe she is thinking that she wants to leave a legacy at the Fed, and in the next policy review, she could push for climate change, create involve digital currencies. And, you know.
Anna, we got to run. Thank you so much. Bloomberg Economics Chief U.S. Economist Anna Wong, along with Bloomberg News International Economics and Policy Correspondent Mike McKee. You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week. We're going to continue covering the Fed, but we're also going to talk a little bit about COVID, certainly key to our economy. This is Bloomberg.
Broadcasting live from the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio in New York. Bloomberg 1130. To Washington, D.C., Bloomberg 99.1. To Boston, Bloomberg 106.1. To San Francisco, Bloomberg 960. To the country, Sirius XM Channel 119. And around the globe, the Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Bloomberg Business Week.
This is Bloomberg Business Week on this Monday. Most read story on the Bloomberg in the past 8 hours. Chancellor Angela Merkel of Germany saying that the COVID spike they are seeing worse than anything that they've seen before. We're going to talk about COVID and the latest headlines. We'll get to that in just a moment with Dr. Ian Lustbader over at NYU Langone. First up, though, back to the markets and your top business stories. Here is once again Doug Prisner.
Hey, Carol, let me just pick up on the point you were just addressing there. In Europe right now, I'm looking at a much weaker euro at $1.1239, down about 0.5%. In addition to those comments from Angela Merkel, we have Austria now in its fourth national lockdown. Stateside, rates are up, the dollar is rallying, and the equity market is mixed. Our top story, of course, President Biden selecting Jay Powell for a second term as Fed chair. The president also elevated Governor Lael Brainerd to the role of vice chair. Needless to say, this removes a lot of uncertainty. It also emphasizes continuity. Now the conversation can focus on the question of how aggressive the Fed should be in combating higher inflation. We'll get more insight into the Fed's thinking on Wednesday with the release of the minutes from the last policy meeting. At the moment, the market is pricing in a quarter-point rate hike at the June meeting, then a second increase set for November of next year. So the entire yield curve is higher. 2-year Treasury right now, 57 basis points, a 10-year at 160, and a mixed picture for stocks. We have the Dow higher by about 0.7%, but that move up in rates has weakened a lot of the information tech group, and as a result, NASDAQ comp down about 0.3%. In the broader market, though, S&P at 4720, so we're at record highs. I'm Doug Krisner. That's your Bloomberg Business Flash.
Bit of a funny market today. All right, Doug, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Doug, highlighting some of those key COVID stories that are out today. Not stories, realities. Austria going into its fourth national lockdown today. Germany, as we mentioned, their latest surge in COVID-19 infections, worse than anything the country has experienced so far. Again, that bears repeating, that from Chancellor Angela Merkel today. So let's get to it. Back with us, Dr. Ian Lustbader, clinical professor of medicine at NYU Langone. He's with us on the phone in New York City. Ian, good to have you here with Ed Ludlow, one of my colleagues here at Bloomberg. What are you seeing when it comes to COVID? Because I think the fear out there, safe to say, is that what's happening in Europe is going to happen here in the United States. I've seen this movie before.
Yes, for sure. Hi, Carol and Ed. Hope everyone is safe and doing well. You know, I think what's happening in Europe with their fourth wave really relates to a number of things. One is a relatively low vaccination rate. Some countries only 60% or so for one vaccine. Other countries, Italy higher and Portugal higher. So there's some vaccine hesitancy. There's also breakthrough infection. So people who've had the two, as we know, after 6 months or 8 months with the alpha vaccines, Delta is breaking through. In addition, those who are lucky enough to get the third booster, we really only have data for about 30 days or so after that. And it does seem fairly effective, but we don't know, months later how effective it is.
Right.
And so in part by doing all of these lockdowns, it's really somewhat unproven, right? So you're locking down people, some of whom have been already infected.
Right.
It's not as if you're doing it for the first time. And lastly, open borders. I mean, you've got people who are and people are not really being tested regularly. So I think there are a number of things that are contributing to what's happening in Europe. And I think in the U.S. our numbers are stabilizing. I really, there may be a little surge after Thanksgiving, but I think we are looking at a few more months, but I don't think much more than that at this point, assuming no mutations occur.
Let me ask you real quickly, because I think, Tim and I have talked to you about this a lot. I bet it's on Ed's mind. Like in terms of getting a booster, if you're 6 months in, sooner if you've gotten the J&J vaccine, if you haven't gotten your booster, go get it.
Right. Yeah, no question. Right. 6 months out, all adults are now approved for Moderna and Pfizer. Some people are getting some reactions to it. Certainly very reasonable to do it. And J&J is a shorter interval, and any of the vaccines are fine for J&J as a booster. And that we think can be helpful.
The data is fascinating, you're right, because in Germany there are 15 million holdouts, right, who have not been vaccinated at all. And the country's kind of really ramped up its vaccination program, but all the doses that are being given out are boosters. So how do they fix the remainder? What is the solution here? Is it a mandate, making a vaccine compulsory as they've done in Austria?
Really, the approach to any pandemic is prevention with vaccines, testing. People should be tested, nasal swabs or spit tests, antigen, and treatment. And we do have some treatment that also can be preventative. In other words, there are monoclonal antibody treatments that are very effective if given within 7 to 10 days. There are also monoclonal shots. We've been dealing with this 2 years, and we should have been doing more extensive studies on ways to treat and not just rely on vaccines, because obviously not everyone will get a vaccine. So we do have some options. These are not cheap, of course, the monoclonal antibodies. And I think you need a multi-pronged approach. Just taking one approach like vaccine or lockdown, one size does not fit all. We really should have several approaches.
All right, so I want to know, as Ed is in London, he's not normally there. He's normally in San Francisco. So he's doing some traveling. People are traveling. I got on an airplane, as you know, for the first time in October. I was at the UBS Arena. We did a live broadcast. There were lots of people, workers, professionals, you name it, everybody walking around for the most part without masks. What's your advice, though, as we continue to move forward when it comes to mask wearing?
Unfortunately, the vaccines are not all perfect, including boosters will help. Masks, again, unless they're N95s, are not perfect. If you're flying on a crowded airplane and they're not testing people beforehand, that's all a bit of a risk. Stay in shape, take some vitamin D, get your levels up. Certainly get tested if you feel it's sick at all before and certainly after the flight. Fortunately, most people, not all, are vaccinated, and I think it's a calculated risk. But I think we have.
Well, I mean, come on, all of this though. This all sounds like common sense stuff. Is the biggest takeaway from this global pandemic just that prior to the pandemic we weren't that hygienic? None of us have been washing our hands properly.
Speak for yourself,
what
Ed
is the
Ludlow.
basic? Well, I'm just asking. Is this the reality from here on in?
No, I wish it was as simple as just washing hands and coughing and masks. I think all of those help. This is what pandemics do. Not everyone is vaccinated at the same time. It spreads around the world. It usually takes 3 years if you're going by the 1918, Spanish flu, the H1N1. And I think we're a little naive to think that we could have controlled this perfectly unless we had been more aggressive very early on and developed treatment more early on and got everyone vaccinated early on. So once the cat's out of the bag, we're dealing with really what are natural consequences. And I think we like to think, if we lock down or if we do this or the mask is the right approach.
Right.
I think they're all helpful, but it's not going to solve the problem, I'm afraid.
All right, going to leave it there. Ian, have a wonderful and safe Thanksgiving, and so good to check in with you. We'll talk to you next week. Dr. Ian Lustbader, clinical professor of medicine at NYU Langone Medical Center, on the phone in New York City. Off to D.C. we go for a check on world and national news, and to Nancy Lyons. Hey, Nance.
Thanks, Carol. President Biden is going with Jerome Powell to serve a second term as chairman of the Federal Reserve Board and is elevating board member Lael Brainerd to vice chair. Bloomberg's Zerf Chapman reports on today's White House announcement.
The president lauded Jay Powell for preserving the Fed's independence, standing up to what he called unprecedented political interference from the Republican administration which appointed him.
Jay's steady and decisive leadership helped to stabilize markets and put our economy on track to a robust recovery. That's an economy where companies have to compete to attract workers instead of workers competing with each other.
The president also lauded Powell for recognizing that climate change is a major risk to the financial system and that bank regulation must stay ahead of the risks posed by financial experimentation. In Washington, Irv Chapman, Bloomberg Radio.
A man suspected of driving an SUV into a holiday parade in Waukesha, Wisconsin, has been identified as Darrell Brooks Jr., and authorities say the 39-year-old will face 5 counts of first-degree intentional homicide. Police Chief Daniel Thompson says there was no police chase leading to the tragedy.
We have information that the suspect prior to the incident was involved in a domestic disturbance, which was just minutes prior, and the suspect left that scene just prior to our arrival.
Thompson says in addition to the 5 killed, 4 women and 1 man, More than 40 others were injured after the car sped through barricades and then slammed into the parade last night. Authorities say the incident was not related to terrorism. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Nancy Lyons.
All right, Nance, thank you so much. Carol Masser, along with Ed Ludlow, on this Monday edition of Bloomberg Business Week. Ed's in London. I'm in New York in our Interactive Brokers studio. This is a story, Ed, I've been following. I don't know if you have been as well. It's interesting. It talks about the Chinese tennis player, and forgive my mispronunciation, Peng Shuai, who posted details of a years-long affair with a former top Communist Party official. And the United Nations, the White House, the Women's Tennis Association, and some of the sport's biggest stars have expressed concern for her safety. They've been out there on social media and elsewhere, and skepticism about China's official reassurances. And it kind of puts the International Olympic Committee in an interesting position, Ed.
It does, and I haven't been following it closely. I've read the story through several times today, and I read it again and again to understand the crux of what they're discussing about, and that is players' safety, but also the role of these officials in making decisions around the Olympics. You know, I am a passionate sports fan. Carol knows this. I adore sport across all categories, and how often in history have we talked about the Olympics supposed to be apolitical?
Right.
And yet every Olympic cycle has a political story tied to it, whether it's Russia, whether it's doping, whether it's bribes. You know, it's really shocking, actually, isn't it?
Yeah, and, you know, it does feel like it's increasingly political. It also, no doubt about it, though, a common underlying factor is the amount of money that's always at stake when there are decisions to be made. And sometimes that is at conflict with kind of the social mood that's out there on a global scale. And we know Peng went missing earlier this month. She wrote on Weibo that former Vice Premier Zhang Guoli, who served in the top echelons of the party, had pressured her to have sex. That was there. I guess she has not really been seen in some time.
Well, that's the key bit, right? The IOC wasn't able to answer the question, where is she? Have you heard from her? The International Olympic Committee. So that is worrying.
Right, and they haven't addressed some of those key concerns, including why others can't get in touch with her at this point. So it's out there as we count down, 74 days until the 2022 Winter Olympics. So a lot on everyone's mind.
events, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Holy moly, what a Monday. Rates are up, the dollar is rallying, and we have a mixed picture for the equity market. The S&P is extending a record right now with a gain of about 0.5%. Our top story, President Biden has selected Chair Jay Powell for a second term to lead the Fed. And then on top of that, the president elevated Governor Lael Brainerd to the role of vice chair. So now the conversation can really focus on the question of how aggressive the Fed should be in combating higher inflation. The entire U.S. yield curve has moved up. 10-year Treasury right now at 161. We have the NASDAQ composite down about 0.2%, given that move up in rates. The Dow, though, gaining about 0.7%. And with the news on the Fed and the market reaction, bank stocks trading higher, that shouldn't come as a surprise, right? The KBW Bank Index is up about 2.7% right now. And oil, right now, the WTI price in the extended session here, up about 1.1%. We're trading 76.80 thereabouts. OPEC Plus may reconsider its plan to add supply next month. That's if consuming countries go through with this idea of a coordinated release from their respective strategic petroleum reserves. If you look at the dollar, we've got a rally underway with the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index higher by 0.5%. Much weaker yen, much weaker euro. I'm Doug Krisner. That's your Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, got it, Doug. Thank you so much. So this week's special double issue of Bloomberg Business Week magazine, it's out on newsstands, online at Bloomberg.com, businessweek.com, and of course on the Bloomberg terminal. It's an inflation takeover. Several stories looking at the ugly green monster from several different angles, including whether Fed Chief Jay Powell will need to take a page from the playbook of one iconic Fed head and the tough decision that he had to make. So let's get to this story. The person who wrote it is Bloomberg News Markets editor Joe Weisenthal. He's in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker studio, joining Ed Ludlow and me. Hey, Joe, I love this story.
Thank you.
I love the whole inflation takeover because it's like inflation's back, but do we need to be so freaked out about it? Tell us about Paul Volcker and what he had to do going back to his tenure.
So the Fed has, for a long time, had this dual mandate of, stable prices and full employment. And inflation in the late 70s, early 80s was perceived to be getting so out of control. And Volcker is remembered essentially for having the temerity to induce a recession. And millions of people got out of work, but that broke the back of inflation. And
he raised rates.
He raised rates very aggressively until it induced a recession. And in doing so, that kind of put an end to inflation, and then we had this sort of multi-decade period of pretty stable prices since then. The question, now we're coming off of like 10 years of underemployment of the great financial crisis, chronic underemployment. We still have 5 million, at least, maybe 6 or 7 million underemployed. And so the idea in my piece was like maybe to pull a Volcker in the year 2021 is to ignore the inflation side of the mandate for now, the opposite of what Volcker did, and make the commitment on jobs, which Powell has done multiple times, and make the bet that inflation is transitory, as the Fed more or less still believes.
The timing is interesting, though, right? Because Powell has stressed a commitment to maximum employment, not just for weeks, but for months. And then you got that really hot CPI print for October. I wasn't around in the 70s. I wasn't around in 1990 either, when inflation was like this.
History books, guys.
Right, exactly. But, did that inflation print change things for Jay Powell and the Fed?
It definitely changed the political conversation about inflation. And I think that, there were a lot of people, that number rattled the White House clearly, and since then we've seen Biden talking more about inflation and even trying to pitch some of his fiscal plans as inflation fighting. I'm not so sure. I think most people don't really buy that completely. Regardless, that's how much it jarred the politics. It got a lot of people to say, the transitory is a myth, etc. And so it certainly, if nothing else, ratchets up the heat on Powell. It's like, all right, do you really have how convinced are you, Jay, still that inflation is transitory? And I think the heat has now been turned on the Fed a bit hotter.
So, Joe, what's the economic, I'm thinking, I'm bringing out my economic books and trying to understand. So if he continues to keep rates low, is that going to then encourage more people to come back to the workforce because the economic momentum will continue? Is that
I think the way to think about it, perhaps, is not that low rates will encourage people to come back per se. Because look, people point out, it's like, look, you cut rates to zero, that doesn't suddenly make economic growth happen. What I think you can say is the opposite, that for rate hikes to have an effect on inflation, you really would need to go hard.
Yeah.
That if you just hike rates 25 basis points, 50 basis points, you're not doing too much. And so I think the argument is more that, okay, you want the Fed to take care of inflation, this is what it's got to be. It's got to be a real series of hard hikes. And is that something you want to do with a 5 million employment hole? Do you really want to like go down that road of slowing demand when there's so many people still who want to come back into the workforce once this, pandemic and other live disruptions come to an end? We're still in the middle of a pandemic.
Joe, it's an unfair question, but it'd be remiss of me not to ask about the new duo.
Yeah.
A Brainard-Powell combo.
Yeah.
How would that have changed how you'd gone about writing that piece?
I think, to be honest, I don't think there was as much daylight on monetary policy as some people like to imagine. I mean, there was this perception of like Brainard having been more dovish. I don't really think that's
expansionary.
I don't really think that's based on all that much. I think more or less if you look at their track records, they're probably more in line. I suspect that Brainard believes a little bit more in perhaps some of the Fed's supervisory roles, perhaps believes that the Fed can take on more climate responsibilities, although Chairman Powell has talked about that recently too. But, from the perspective of the markets, from the perspective of like gauging what the policy path of rate hikes, I would be surprised if either one had a sort of like materially different vision in mind about the existing trajectory.
One thing I wonder too is that if I think about the economy, as you kicked it off with, Joe, is the idea that rates were so low for so long.
Yeah.
Like this was, we've got a generation easily of people, investors on Wall Street who have never seen a high rate environment. Yeah. So was that the true picture, or is it all of a sudden the bump that we're seeing kind of a catch up from all of those years of low inflation? Like what's the true picture, I guess, is my question.
I would say two things. I mean, one is, we did have 9 hikes starting in 2015, and the market absorbed them a lot better than I think a lot of people would have guessed. Because I remember in 2013, 2014, a lot of people was like, oh, this market is going to be dependent on ZIRP forever. And that didn't turn out to be the case. It turned out that it started with Yellen and then into Powell. There were a series of rate hikes. Then, of course, we had the slowdown in 2018, so they got reversed in 2019. Then, of course, the pandemic hit in 2020, and that erased everything. But the market then showed an ability to withstand rate hikes. Look, I think that from a macro perspective, and Biden said this today, he's like, we should pursue an economy where, and I don't know the exact words, but he said, where employers are fighting over workers rather than workers fighting for jobs. And if that were to be sustained, I mean, we kind of see it these days, but if that were to be sustained for any period of time, that would be a very different regime from what any of us are used to in recent decades.
It's a really good point. Very different economy.
Very different, yeah.
I mean, this is just ignorance on my part, but is there a policy path where they can meet the dual mandate? Surely one, as based on this, has to suffer at the expense of the other for the short term.
Yeah, I mean, right. And right now, you would say, if you just looked in isolation, you'd say unemployment rate at 4.5% and inflation at 6.2%. They're missing on the inflation side. The counter argument is that, look, some big drivers of inflation really do seem to be idiosyncratic or transitory. We know that used cars is still a really big factor, even after all this time. And that there's good reason to think that raising rates doesn't solve that. And are they hitting on the employment side? Not clear of that either, because although unemployment is low, numerous measures are still a long way to go. It's easy to imagine, though, close to full employment in 9 months and inflation starting to turn the corner, and the dual mandate may be hit. So
listen,
I think it's still possible.
The drop off in the economy and then the big bounce back so quickly has reminded you how quickly things can change depending on what's going on. Joe Weisenthal, it's a must read. Thank you so much. He is digital news executive editor here at Bloomberg News in our Interactive Brokers studio. You're listening to Bloomberg Radio. This is Bloomberg.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
3 p.m. on Wall Street, we have rates up, the dollar rallying, and the equity market trading mixed. I'm Doug Krisner at Bloomberg World Headquarters in New York. Our top story, President Biden has selected Jay Powell for a second term as Fed chairman.
I believe having Fed leadership with a broad bipartisan support is important, especially now in such a politically divided nation. I believe we need to do everything we can to take the bitter partisanship of today's politics out of something as important as the independence and credibility of the Federal Reserve. This is vital to maintaining public trust in an independent institution like the Federal Reserve. And that is why I'm so proud as well to nominate Dr. Lael Brainerd, to serve as Vice Chair of the Federal Reserve.
Now, today's announcement removes a lot of uncertainty. It also emphasizes continuity at the Fed. So the conversation can pivot to the question of how aggressive the Fed should be in combating higher inflation. We have the entire U.S. yield curve moving up, 10-year Treasury at 162, a 2-year at 58 basis points. Not surprising that many of the bank stocks are moving higher as rates rise. The KBW Bank Index right now with a gain of about 2.7%. Now, for the overall equity market, we're mixed. The spike in rates has weakened a lot of information tech and communication services shares. The NASDAQ composite is down about 0.2%, but we have the Dow higher by 0.8%. And in the broader market, the S&P 500 better by about 0.6%. OPEC Plus may consider or reconsider a plan to add supply next month if consuming countries go through with a coordinated release from their respective strategic reserves. WTI is up 1% right now in the extended session, trading 76.70. The dollar rallying with the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index higher by 0.5%. I'm Doug Krisner, and that is your Bloomberg Business Flash.
This is Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Bloomberg Quick Takes Tim Stenovic on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, you are listening to Bloomberg Business Week, brought to you by SEI. Today's competitive marketplace requires asset managers to become more operationally adept. See how you can transform your business with SEI's global platform at SEIC.com/IMS. Well, we want to talk about the Bloomberg New Economy Forum, which hosted its annual forum in person in Singapore last week. The event, as you know, from the many interviews and stories that we highlighted on air last week, is all about illuminating the challenges facing the new economy and really getting to the solutions and the voices who are in that journey. Here with a look back at the week, some of the major themes and newsmakers, is Bloomberg New Economy editorial director Andy Brown joins us in our Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio. First of all, congratulations. You pulled it off in person in Singapore. Tell us about kind of the mood of the event.
Well, thanks, Carol. It was an incredible event. We got 300 delegates, many of them CEOs, government ministers, entrepreneurs, scientists, to fly halfway around the world to Singapore to start working on big problems relating to climate and pandemic control and trade. It just felt like, this was the first really big gathering of its kind since the start of COVID. And what gave it this added urgency was that it was a few days after the end of COP26 in Glasgow. And so, the CEOs and Mike Bloomberg, of course, was there ready to think about the business end of climate. We had all these high-level commitments, pledges in Glasgow. Okay, how do we turn those now into real opportunities? How do we deploy the trillions of dollars that's necessary to reinvent our energy systems and transport systems? And so we had CEOs, bankers, financiers, government ministers sitting in workshops talking about just that.
Were people frustrated after COP26? I wanted to ask that. It was almost a sort of follow-on event because they happened in quick succession. Did they just pick up the discussion from Glasgow and bring it to Singapore, or was there a change of theme?
Well, Asia was the place to be because, as you know, Asia is where, the climate agenda is going to be made or broken. China, of course, is by far the world's biggest emitter, bigger than the next 4 largest combined. And the fastest growing emissions are from the newly industrializing countries in Asia. So getting climate under control, getting emissions under control in Asia is absolutely critical. And a lot of the conversations that we were having there was around how do we provide the infrastructure, the energy systems, and how do we supply infrastructure to work on mitigation and adaptation, I mean, really basic things like, hurricane-proof roofs on hospitals. How do we provide the funding to make all that happen?
Well, and what's interesting too, and I feel like right out of the gate though, with the first comments, the first speeches, front and center was the relationship between U.S. and China.
Yes, that was the big one. And as always, Henry Kissinger is a sort of has wise counsel on that. Two years ago, in 2019, when we held the New Economy Forum in Beijing, he warned that we were in the foothills of a new Cold War. That was a year after then President Donald Trump had launched his tariff war on China. Last year, it was a virtual event, and he was asked by John Micklethwaite, our editor-in-chief, whether we had progressed through the foothills, and whether we were in the mountains. And he said, yes, we're in the high mountain passes. This was last year. This year, John was talking to him again, interviewing him on stage, and said, well, where are we now? And he said, well, we're through the passes, and we're at the edge of a precipice. And I think there was a real sense among a lot of the delegates that we're in a very, very dangerous place now between the U.S. and China.
What specifically? And I wonder if they're concerned about some kind of military acts at this point involving with Taiwan. Like, what is it specifically that they see? Or is it trade? Is it business?
Well, I think it's, first of all, there is no dialogue. I mean, all of the platforms in which officials from the two sides would get together, there was a strategic economic dialogue that Hank Paulson had helped set up, and all kinds of interactions, academics, journalistic, and so on. I mean, all this is now stalling out, so there's no real communication between the two sides. I mean, Henry Kissinger had talked about the Cold War, but in some ways this is much more dangerous than the Cold War. I mean, in the Cold War, there were rules of the road. What would happen if you have an accident at sea or in the air? Right. There is nothing now, and this is why Joe Biden goes into his meeting with President Xi Jinping saying, we've got to put guardrails around this.
Did anybody think that was significant, that virtual meeting?
Yes, and I think Kissinger saw this as being significant, that he had talked about being at the precipice, and I think the sense was that he felt that meeting had started to take the two sides back from the precipice. I mean, the hope is not that, that the two sides are going to make up or anything remotely like that, but that we've reached a sort of a rock bottom. I mean, there were very low expectations coming out of it, but we've seen small, but I think reasonably significant improvements and concrete results coming out of it. For instance, restoring journalist visas. That's important. More important, an agreement for the two militaries to start talking. That's important. I mean, China is in the throes of rapid nuclear expansion. Over the summer, stunned the Pentagon with this hypersonic nuclear-capable missile. A lot happening on the military front.
Just got about 25 seconds. Do you have a favorite conversation? Am I able to even ask you that, just quickly?
Yeah, the last day was really interesting. We were talking about great power, competition, and how smaller countries are going to line up in this. And the sense in Asian countries is we really don't want to choose. Yes, you're our friend, United States, you're our ally, but you know what? China's our biggest trading partner.
Bottom line. Great conversations, Andy, and I know we scratched the surface, but thank you so much for breaking it down. Andy Brown, editorial director at Bloomberg New Economy. You can sign up for the New Economy daily newsletter at bloomberg.com/new-economy, and you can also go to Bloomberg and search on New Economy to listen to those conversations. You're listening to Bloomberg Radio. All right, let's get back to World and National News. Over to Nancy Lyon. She's in our 901 newsroom in the nation's capital. Hey, Nance.
Thanks, Carol. The U.S. is preparing to dip into a strategic oil reserve at the same time as several key allies.
The announcement could come as soon as tomorrow. Sources tell Bloomberg News President Biden is considering a release of more than 35 million barrels of oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve over time, though they say the situation is in flux and plans could change. We're told the U.S. could make the move alongside India, Japan, and South Korea. It would be an unprecedented effort at global coordination after OPEC and its allies rebuffed calls from the U.S. to boost its own oil production. In Washington, I'm Nathan Hager, Bloomberg Radio.
Germany's latest surge in COVID-19 infections is worse than anything the country has experienced so far. That's the word from Chancellor Angela Merkel, who is calling for tighter restrictions. Germany's health minister Jens Spahn has his own take on the situation.
Probably by the end of winter, almost everyone in Germany, it might be cynical to say, will be either vaccinated, cured, or dead. But that really is the case. This is very possible with the extremely infectious Delta variant.
Spahn says he's rushing out an extra 6 million doses of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine. Neighboring Austria went into its fourth national lockdown today. The Biden administration is expected to announce this afternoon it's investing $1.5 billion from the coronavirus relief package to shore up healthcare access in underserved communities and incentivize healthcare workers to work in those communities. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries.
All right, Nance, thank you so much. You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Carol Masser, my co-host Tim Stanovic, is off today. Ed Ludlow, though, in his place. And Ed, you have flown from what, San Francisco to London?
I have, an international flight, and I enjoyed it.
Any unruly behavior on that flight?
No, there wasn't. And I love this story because I fly a lot, as you know, and I know you've only recently started flying again, but it doesn't matter if you're flying for business or leisure. It's still stressful. You know, the extra protocols, the mask, it adds anxiety. So to read about, you know, these huge fines that people are facing for either alcohol-induced unruliness or just general unruliness, it's really interesting.
All right, so let's get to the story. U.S. regulators proposed $161,000, almost $162,000 in fines against 8 airline passengers for alleged alcohol-related misbehavior, saying the rate of unruly behavior in flights, quote, remains too high. The highest penalty announced was about almost $41,000 against a traveler who flew Southwest on April 15th from San Jose to San Diego. The FAA alleges the person drank their own alcohol during the flight, then sexually assaulted the flight attendant. The traveler was arrested by police at the arrival gate.
I mean, what's astonishing is that if you take the bigger picture, the FAA in 2021 only got 300 reports total for alcohol, you know, induced unruly behavior. So these 8, you know, must have done something particularly bad or particularly strong to face what was basically a very expensive ticket.
Yeah, exactly. And then the other fines they talked about was anywhere from about $34,000 to about $8,200.
Right.
They can't, the FAA that is, file criminal prosecutions, but is working with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the Justice Department. I mean, basically, I kind of feel for these airlines. I mean, they shouldn't be left to have to police everything. And personally, I think, you know, you get them off and send them to the police is what many people would argue. There has to be, you know, actions have consequences, and especially when you're flying around up in these skies, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, you're listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Carol Masser along with Ed Ludlow, and this is Bloomberg Radio.
updates, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Tape. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Less than 43 minutes until the closing bell. We have rates up. The dollar is rallying against the majors, and the equity market is trading mixed. Let's get you to the Bloomberg macro squawk desk for the very latest, and Bill Maloney. Hey, Bill.
And good afternoon, Doug. That's right. U.S. stocks are trading mixed after some late morning weakness. Dow is back up 287 points. S&P's gained 28. NASDAQ is lower by 22. The U.S. 10-year yield at 1.62%. Gold is down 41 points. And Bitcoin drops by 5.8%. Among the main 11 S&P sectors, leaders were energy and the financials. Only telecom was in the red. And leaders to the upside in the Dow, Goldman Sachs, Cisco, and Travelers, while Visa, Boeing, and Amgen led to the downside. In deal news, Athena Health to be acquired by H&F and Bain for $17 billion. And in other news, Apple hit another all-time record high. Wrapping things up, Zoom Video reports after the bell. Live from the First Breaking News Desk, I'm Bill Maloney. Doug.
All right, Bill, thank you. And our top story, President Biden selecting Jay Powell for a second term as Fed chair. The president also elevating Governor Lael Brainerd as vice chair. And as a result of this news, the entire yield curve has actually moved up today. If you'd like, by the way, more live audio updates on market action through the day, the function on the Bloomberg terminal, SQUA, then the green go key. I'm Doug Krisner. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Doug, thank you so much. Well, talk about a possible Monster combination. We're talking about that of Monster Beverage. I know, I had to do it. Don't judge me.
Monster Monday.
I know. Well, Monster Beverage, we know them as, of course, the maker of energy drinks, perhaps mixing it up in the beverage world by joining forces with Corona Brewer, Constellation Brands. Monster said to be exploring such a combination between the two, according to those familiar with the matter. So let's get into it. Monster, by the way, that stock is up about 1.5%. And let me pull up Constellation, if I may, and just get a quick check on what that stock's doing in today's trade. It is down about 0.4%. Ken Shea is tracking this. He's Bloomberg Intelligence Senior Analyst for Global Beverages, Tobacco, and Cannabis. He's with us on the phone in New Jersey. Hey, Ken, good to have you here with Ed and myself. So, is this likely?
Hi, Carol, Ed.
Hey.
And Ed, you know, it doesn't surprise me that these firms would be chatting. You know, they all have different needs in terms of growth platforms. Constellation is looking for more diversification from its beer strength. It wants to get into soft drinks, low alcohol refreshers, as I see it. And it also wants to get into non-U.S. markets. It's by and large a U.S. company. Monster is very narrowly focused on the energy market, which is becoming more and more competitive. Yeah, they've had a great growth run, but the markets going forward are going to get tougher. PepsiCo is, really setting its sights on this market, and others are. And then Coca-Cola sitting in the background with a 19% stake of Monster. It could be a player here too. So. And it has needs also to diversify from soft drinks. So all these guys need something to grow, and I think they can get assistance from another. It's the devil's in the details, though. We don't know where this is going to go and how they're going to figure it out.
Well, we all need something, whether it's a high caffeine beverage or an alcoholic beverage at the end of the day. But you think about the mix of those two, the regulators will have something to say about this, won't they?
Yeah, the regulators have really pushed back hard on smaller players who try to mix alcohol and caffeine. That's kind of a no-no in many markets. And so I don't think, that's the obvious.
Ed's thinking, yeah, it's kind of a no-no to mix anyway.
Yeah, I mean, but I think beyond that, though, this is really, it could make sense as a joint venture between Monster and Constellation. As I mentioned, they can both help each other out. Constellation has tried hard to get into the hard seltzer market, and it hasn't really worked out well for them. Monster has a strength, perhaps, there. Monster would like to consider, it's said in the past, it was going to consider CBD beverages. Well, Constellation's got a big stake in Canopy Growth. So there's some things they could do for each other.
What about, there's some interesting relationships, and you pointed out, or Ed Hammond points it out in our story that's on the Bloomberg about Monster having a relationship with Coca-Cola. That could be tricky. And then you've also got any transaction with Constellation will require the support of the Sands family, which has built the company into that global beverages player that it is today. How does that complicate those two aspects?
Well, that's certainly going to be a roadblock in terms of, needing their okay to do anything. Having said that, though, Constellation, to their credit, has been has been a risk taker over the last few years. Just think about the cannabis investment alone, Canopy Growth. They've been kind of a lone wolf there in that approach. Hasn't worked out for them yet, but I think over time it very well could. Coca-Cola with a 19% stake in Monster. It's probably kicking itself that it just didn't buy it years ago. It's kind of ran from it.
Good point.
But
well, now it's massive though, right? Like this would be a mega deal, Ken, is what I was saying. These are both $40 billion plus companies. And I wonder, how much of this is the experience of 2021, supply chain disruption, the ability to maneuver around that? Are these guys just looking for scale?
It's a good question. I'm not really sure. I think this is what it sounds to me like a more strategic venture into what they call white space, meaning markets that they're underserving, as opposed to riding through some cyclical pressure like, supply chain. That's kind of a cost of doing business. But I think that they really are looking for creating new products together. And Coke is going to be more than happy to have an indirect exposure to whatever Monster and Constellation, conjure up. Coke will only benefit, again, given its equity stake in Monster.
Well, hey, you know what I'm thinking, Ken, too, for the investors that are listening and the Bloomberg audience that's out there on radio and on YouTube right now. So when it comes to the beverage industry, Coke has been phenomenal in kind of, creating partnerships and going after lots of different brands. What will be the model going forward? Will it be an M&A one, an acquisition one, or will it be a joint venture or partnership one? And just got about 30 seconds.
I think this is going to end up a joint venture. I don't see these two companies merging. There's just too many dissimilar elements. I don't see a lot of synergies from a cost point of view. But I think they can certainly help each other from a joint venture point of view. And I think Coca-Cola can participate to a limited extent also, helping them both.
All right, got a beverage of choice coming ahead of Thanksgiving, Mr. Shea?
Oh, I love my beer. So I'm a beer guy still. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
That was easy. That was easy. Ed, got a beverage of choice ahead of Thanksgiving?
Yeah, well, flat room temperature English beer. That's what I'm enjoying this week.
Brit. All right, we're going to leave it there. Ken Shea, thank you so much. Senior analyst for global beverages, tobacco, and cannabis at Bloomberg Intelligence. As I mentioned, shares of Monster Beverage, they're up, though, about 1.5%. And we're not seeing too much movement when it comes to Constellation. You're listening to Bloomberg Radio.
Broadcasting live from the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers Studio in New York. Bloomberg 1130. To Washington, D.C., Bloomberg 99.1. To Boston, Bloomberg 106.1. To San Francisco, Bloomberg 960. To the country, Sirius XM Channel 119. And around the globe, the Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Bloomberg Business Week.
All right, folks, just about 29 minutes left in today's trading session. Ed Ludlow, you know what comes next?
I know what comes next. We're playing some music.
You're going to see if you can guess it. Pressure's on.
Oh, sorry.
It's okay.
It was Mr. Wilson's chart of the day. Sorry.
That's okay.
For the audience, I do pay attention.
All right,
yeah.
team, could we get some coffee to Mr. Ludlow, please, in London?
Sorry.
All right, we're going to get to Dave Wilson in just a moment. Right now, though, it's to Doug Krisner with a check on that trading day. Doug, just about a half an hour to go here.
Yeah, Carol, we've been talking a lot about the decision on the part of President Biden. He has selected Jay Powell for a second term as Fed chair, and he's also elevated Governor Lael Brainerd for the role of vice chair. This seems likely to produce a much less contentious confirmation battle in the Senate. We've got the midterm elections next year and obviously inflation on the front burner. That's a very major issue. We're going to get a lot more insight to that on Wednesday when the Fed releases minutes from the last policy meeting. For the moment, though, we have the entire U.S. yield curve moving up. A 10-year Treasury now at 162. In terms of the equity trade, it's mixed. The move up in rates has weakened a lot of the information tech and communication services stocks. It's helped to pull the NASDAQ composite lower by about 0.3%. But the Dow is advancing by 0.7%. And in the broader market, energy leading the S&P higher by 0.5%. Speaking of energy, crude oil in New York is up right now in the extended session by about 0.8%. OPEC Plus will meet next week, and they may reconsider the plan to add supply. That's if consumer countries were to go through some kind of coordinated plan to release oil from their strategic reserves. We've got a much stronger dollar. That's probably having an adverse impact on the price of oil, at least containing any gain that we're seeing today, with the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index rising about 0.5%. I'm Doug Krisner. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Doug, really appreciate that. You are listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Carol Massar along with Ed Ludlow, and this is Bloomberg.
You gotta give me, 'cause I can't get the best unless I got room to move.
Is this The Who?
No.
But is it Roger Daltrey?
No.
Darn it.
But you're thinking British artist, and there's something to be said for that.
Is it up? Oh. You got it, Ed Ludlow? No.
No. The harmonica's really...
Oh, yeah. He's grooving on the harmonica.
Is it jazz, jazzy, bluesy?
Bluesy, definitely.
It's bluesy.
It's John Mayall. Let's go.
Yep.
Cut to the chase here.
Yep.
And the song "Room to Move." You know, there are a whole lot of people that came out of John Mayall's Blues Breakers, which the band he had before he went solo. I'll give you a few names. See if you remember any of them. Mick Taylor became the guitarist in the Rolling Stones.
Right.
Eric Clapton.
Right.
And John McVie.
John McVie of Fleetwood Mac.
Yeah, the Mac of Fleetwood Mac. This is
husband of Christine.
This is pre-Fleetwood Mac. In any case.
All right.
Room to move. That's what companies have when it comes to being able to buy back their shares. At least that's what Andrew Garthwaite contends. He's a global strategist over at Credit Suisse. And, last week he came out with his look-ahead report for 2022. And one of the things he pointed out is that, at least in his view, companies have, quote, substantial scope here in the U.S. to buy back shares. And how he drew that conclusion is through a yield comparison. He looked at earnings yields, basically the inverse of the price-earnings ratio, based on projected profit as opposed to historical results, and compare that with the average yield on junk bonds, high-yield debt. And so the idea is, higher yields suggest cheaper. And for more than half the stocks in the S&P